It's a few weeks, but I think the market was like, well, hold on. We traded this stock on the idea you guys got your act together on AI, and they want to see some evidence of that it will be in consumer hands with a firm date and how that translates to the App Store and downloading more or paying for more services.
Okay, and I just want to throw in Amazon in there as well,
Please,
because Google Cloud had some decent results last week,
exactly,
which seemed to bode well for Microsoft's Azure and also for Amazon Web Services, although AWS is kind of the market leader here.
It is the clear market leader, but Alphabet and Amazon are analogous in the sense that we're all hyped up about AI and cloud growth. Alphabet said pretty definitively that their legacy and core search product was their biggest contributor to top-line growth. Amazon AWS continues to be the cash cow, but there are other areas that surprise us, advertising being one. Their Prime Day window, did that have something beneficial for growth from e-commerce? You know, I think the Amazon story, it's always hard to understand the sum of its parts, but just like Apple, everyone's going, when do we get the AI Alexa? And that might be a big question as well.
All right, well, certainly those will be questions that investors will be asking when the results come out. Ed, always a pleasure to have you here. Ed Ludlow, co-host of Bloomberg Technology, and he'll be joining us later on as we break down those earnings. Now, coming up, Starbucks reports after the closing bell as the company sees a drop in demand across the world, particularly in markets like China where there is stiff competition. This is Bloomberg.
The more that you learn about this case, the more it reads like a Hollywood script. The nature of the killing, the execution, the just brutality of it.
It wasn't in the psyche of people that they could be looted because they are considered so sacred.
And we did it the way you do every single investigation. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
It jumped off the page at me that you could see that there was a Ponzi scheme taking place.
I started hearing mafia, mafia, mafia.
Il sistema è perfetto. Sono gli uomini che spesso non lo sono.
These are the holders of truth and justice. They cannot possibly be doing this. But then they are. They are. And the evidence is there. It's overwhelming.
It's the countdown to the market open as we bring you the first trades across Europe.
We'll debate the most important stories and what will drive the big investment decisions throughout the morning. I'm Guy Johnson.
I'm Kriti Gupta.
And I'm Anna Edwards. Join us every weekday morning for the opening trade, live at 7 a.m. here in London.
Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Asia is at the forefront of some of the world's biggest stories. I'm Sherian in Tokyo.
And I'm Heidi Stroud-Watts here in Sydney, where the trading day begins. We're here in the center of all the action to get you set up with the numbers, news and knowledge you need for the day ahead.
The demand is indeed recovering.
We've been waiting for this moment.
The opportunity of a century.
Join us on Bloomberg The Asia Trade. Weekdays only on Bloomberg TV. Context changes everything.
This is Bloomberg Markets. I'm Scarlett Fu. It's time now for our stock of the hour, and we're watching Starbucks. Little change at the moment in terms of share price, but down a fifth of its value so far this year. Investors are closely watching a pullback in demand from North America to China when it reports after the closing bell. So let's bring in Bloomberg Intelligence senior restaurant analyst Michael Halen to give us a little more insight here. And I mentioned the stock is down 22% this year. It's very much in need of a turnaround story. I guess the first question for you is, what is the good news story that Starbucks is going to try to tell this afternoon?
Well, you know, some of the data that we've seen, we've had some work done for us by an AI machine learning company, Cognovi Labs, to analyze social media posts. We've had some work done by our team at Bloomberg from Second Measure, and they seem to think that traffic has improved a little bit here in the second quarter, in the calendar second quarter in the U.S. So that's kind of the good news. But some of the concerns we have are really about how they're driving that, right? Like in the United States, they had these breakfast pairing meals where they're starting to push through discounts. And so, you know, to us in the short term, that may help boost results. But over the long term, you're training your customers that, you know, the items on your menu aren't worth what you're selling them for, right? And you're actually training them to you know, not come to your store unless there's some sort of discount offered.
Right. They could just look at the retailers and the car makers for guidance on what happens there. So that's the North America story. China is a whole different beast here because the same-store sales are estimated to decline about 10.6%. We know the economic backdrop is very difficult for Starbucks, and there's also a lot of domestic competition that Starbucks faces.
Yeah, the Chinese economy is weak, to your point, and there's a lot of competition, and the competition's coming from much cheaper options from Luckin, McDonald's, and KFC. You know, Starbucks for a latte is, you know, 3 times the price of those competitors, right? And so right now they're under a lot of pressure. You know, and I don't think that their initiatives seem to make much sense, right? They debuted 27 new items last quarter to try to boost traffic, right? But, you know, that's only going to hurt your throughput, and it's not going to bring customers in that are looking for, you know, some sort of a cheaper item, right? And so the fact that they're getting a lot of pressure from the lower, cheaper mass merchant coffee competitors is definitely causing them a lot of problems right now in China.
Okay, so these are kind of structural issues that they need to deal with in addition to the fact that the Chinese economy is weak and consumer sentiment is really not all that strong at the moment. We know that there's been reporting on Elliott Management coming in and building a stake in Starbucks. No word on how big that stake is. I know that you've written about the kinds of things that Starbucks needs to do to get its stock price going. What are you looking for to hear from Elliott Management as they start to really dig in their heels and talk to management about what can be done?
Yeah, we think that they're going to push for a couple of board seats and potentially a management change. You know, what we've written is that a lot of these initiatives management has kind of pushed through don't seem to make sense for us. You know, we want them to get back to the basics of running great restaurants, right? And so they kind of make it tough on themselves because they talk a lot about improving throughput and running great restaurants, but at the same time, they're offering 27 new items in China. They're offering all sorts of new items in the United States, including energy drinks and boba tea type items, right? And so these initiatives kind of contradict one another, right? They talk about, you know, keeping their premium positioning in China, right? But at the same time, they're moving into third-tier cities, right? And so to us, a lot of these initiatives don't really make sense. We think, we expect Elliott to really hold their feet to the fire and try to get them kind of on a back-to-basics mentality.
Yeah. All right, well, we'll see how that all shakes out and what they say, if anything, on the conference call about that. Bloomberg Intelligence analyst Michael Halen giving us a preview of what to expect when Starbucks reports after the close. Now, coming up here on Bloomberg Markets, Bill Ackman's IPO may raise 1/10 of what the hedge fund manager had originally anticipated as one of the major investors pulled out of the deal. This is Bloomberg.
what's happening on Wall Street.
I couldn't have been more wrong.
It's going to stay volatile for a while longer.
It's a bifurcated market.
Need to catch up?
This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston.
We've got the information and insight.
Year over year, you could start to see some cracks.
It might be overhyped short term, but it's underhyped long term.
From businesses most influential and instrumental.
A lot of the doom and gloom has been somewhat overblown.
If you're not living near the edge, you're taking up too much space.
Bloomberg Wall Street Week, live Friday with replays all weekend on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
DOJ or other authorities
could face bigger challenges next.
It was going to keep rain World Cup. This is a three.
As the economic picture.
Covering the intersections of Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and beyond.
Wednesday, the Fed decides.
Who said summers were quiet? I don't remember the last quiet summer.
We're talking about the data not being as accurate during this time of year, an election that's haywire.
Trust Bloomberg to bring you the fastest coverage and exclusive analysis, including Powell's press conference.
Is the answer here, Jeff, that everything is just plain solid?
It's pretty solid, Tom.
At some point, we got to call it a soft landing.
Tune in to Bloomberg Surveillance, The Fed Decides, starting at 1:30 p.m. Eastern.
This is Bloomberg Markets. I'm Scarlett Fu. Now, Bill Ackman's Pershing Square is preparing to go public next week. The billionaire originally targeted a $25 billion debut for his closed-end fund, but that is now looking closer to around $2 billion.
Seeing reports circulating on X here is Lebanese media reporting an explosion in Dahia, in the suburb of Beirut.
$25 billion to maybe $2 billion. What happened?
So he came out and was kind of talking up that $25 billion mark, Scarlett, in a town hall earlier in the month when they were first starting these roadshows, meeting with investors one-on-one, courting the million-plus retail followers that follow him on X, formerly known as Twitter, and really talked up the fact that $20 to $25 billion could be the target for that. Then we saw a few weeks later, last week, saying they're going to cap it at $10 billion, but in a letter that ended up having to be published in a filing with the SEC, he told some of his current investors, you know, 2.4 to 5 billion, or 2.5 to 4 billion dollars, and then today's filing below all of that.
So in the process of these numbers being adjusted lower, the SEC has delayed regulatory approval of the IPO. It's supposed to go public this week. It's not going to happen until later on.
Yeah, we saw when they first launched their pretty lengthy roadshow that they were targeting a deal pricing yesterday evening that would then debut today. Because of that letter, according to the firm, they had to file that with the SEC. That's held things up. They're now, according to term sheets that we've seen, targeting a pricing next week on Monday with trading on Tuesday. But when I talk to some closed-end fund specialists, they aren't completely sold on that timing just because that filing still hasn't been declared effective by the SEC, which is a requirement before that IPO.
Okay, so first things first, SEC has to okay everything. The big issue here is that Seth Klarman of Baupost has decided against investing in the fund. Who are the backers of this fund then, of this closed-end fund?
Well, when we look at that letter that he sent to current Pershing proper investors, he laid out Baupost, he laid out Putnam, he laid out the Teachers of Texas. Now I can't find the Pension Fund of Texas teachers as people who were already spoken for. And then we broke yesterday, Bloomberg, that Baupost actually opted not to be in for that $150 million mark. Still talking up his relationships, it seems to be behind the scenes, but the big question is, $2 billion is still a lot of money, but it's a small fraction of what he had talked up. How much comes from institutions, how much comes from retailers? That's really something we're going to be keeping an eye on.
All right, this is great. And of course, you were behind the reporting that indicated that Bill Ackman was really holding up Berkshire Hathaway as a model for this closed-end fund ahead of the IPO, which we think at this point may take place next week. Billy, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Now, let's stay with Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway and turn to another billionaire, Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway. It is selling its shares of Bank of America. It's unloaded $3 billion of the stock this month alone. Now, Berkshire still owns almost $40 billion of the bank. Bloomberg's Catherine Doherty has been looking into this. Is this a surprise? Because I believe a year ago he was saying that he wanted to stay put in Bank of America.
It wasn't that many months ago. This is his biggest pullback of his investment that he originally made. It was a bet back in 2011 where he was saying Bank of America and CEO Brian Moynihan, I believe in their ability ability to turn this business around. Coming out of the financial crisis, they were dealing with billions of dollars of liabilities that they had to clean up.
From Countrywide.
A lot of these mortgages that they had then inherited. And along the way, Berkshire has continued to build his stake in Bank of America. He has signaled his support of the bank, of Moynihan. So these recent sales, yes. The surprise is just the fact that it's happening. It's been that many years since 2011 that he's just built. He hasn't been selling. Now he is selling. The question is, when do those sales stop, and how big does it get?
Right. Now, Warren Buffett / Berkshire Hathaway is still the biggest shareholder in Bank of America. That
Confirmation now from a security source. A strike on Beirut's southern suburb targets a senior Hezbollah commander. Their fate is unknown at this point.
About Brian Moynihan in recent weeks or months?
So they've been very quiet. Beyond, the comparison to Ackman is actually quite astute. Ackman going out there using words. Berkshire, not words. These are actions, but actions are potentially speaking louder than words. So yes, you make a very good point that Berkshire is still the largest shareholder of Bank of America by a wide margin. So these shares, even though they're selling worth $3 billion, they're still the biggest shareholder. So the support is still there. It's not as if it's a signal of complete distrust or a turnaround in how he is positioning or looking at the investment in the bank. However, if they get below the 10% mark, right now they're at the 12% ownership threshold, then they will likely stop having to declare these sales, and it will be less public. So his maneuvering and his decision-making of his investment in Bank of America might become less of a signal that we, as the public, can see out in the market like we've seen in recent days.
Now, we need to put this into context because Warren Buffett has been making changes to his holdings of U.S. banks since the regional banking turmoil of last year, right? I mean, he exited, I believe, U.S. Bancorp as well as Bank of New York Mellon. So he's been tweaking his holdings of U.S. banks, which makes him the ultimate value investors because financials have not done as well as they could have.
That's right. But when he was tweaking and pulling out of some of those banks that you note, he was emphasizing his support of Bank of America and of Brian Moynihan. So this is the distinction here. Now, I'll also note that when the sales were happening about 2 weeks ago, it was the day or so after Bank of America reported its second quarter earnings, and they were earnings that beat analyst expectations. The stock hit an all-time 2-year high, and so he really timed this right, and there have been subsequent sales at lower prices, so between 44 and 41, which is where the shares are trading around today. And really, we haven't seen much market reaction from the news of Buffett selling. So that might be an indication that this was something folks have been monitoring along the way.
All right, well, it's fascinating. And of course, we'll keep an eye on what happens with that stake. Now 12%, but perhaps shrinking to below 10% if we continue to watch him pull back on that stake. Catherine Doty, thank you. This is Bloomberg.
And Bloomberg has the report under surveillance.
Do you think the jury's still out on the strength of the labor market?
Well, part of the problem is that July is usually a very bad month for jobless claims accuracy.
This Friday, Jonathan, Lisa, Anne-Marie, and Mike will bring you crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed.
We see the jobless numbers climb just bit by bit by bit. Is this a welcome cooling or an unwelcome deterioration?
The July Jobs Report, Friday on Bloomberg.
People ask me all the time, what is the key to being a really good investor? And I tell them it's to surround yourself with and work with the best investors you can find. On Bloomberg Wealth, I'm going to take you to meet the greatest investors in the world, the people that I would like to have managing my money.
What we try to do is combine some of our insights from the fundamental business with external and data set signals. And I think that's a lot of times where the opportunity is.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the opening trade.
This is Bloomberg Technology.
This is the Asia Trade.
You're watching the close.
Welcome to Balance of Power.
This is Bloomberg. The top names in global leadership are on Bloomberg.
I envisage not only some kind of a bridge towards membership or language linked to the irreversibility of Ukraine's membership in NATO, but also some kind of a broader package of military material, of financial aid. The more we support Ukraine right now, the sooner the war will end.
Nobody covers the top global leaders like Bloomberg Television and Radio. From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Kamala Harris heads to Georgia with Democrats now hoping to expand the map. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. As the Harris campaign hits the road, both the Harris and Trump campaigns are out with new ads today. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines in Washington, D.C. And Kaylee, it's fascinating. Both up with their first salvos, but both are ads about Kamala Harris.
Yeah, Kamala Harris's ad is about her record as being a quote-unquote fearless prosecutor for the most part, a $50 million ad buy coming from her campaign, whereas the first tranche of Donald Trump's ad buy, $12 million, is also about Harris, specifically her record, or rather this administration's record when it comes to the border and immigration.
Dangerously liberal, she's called. You see her dancing there at the hip-hop celebration that took place a couple of months ago. Interesting to play them both against each other here, which we're going to do coming up with our political panel a little bit later in this hour. Kaylee, it just speaks to the fact that both campaigns are trying to identify this new element at the top of the Democratic ticket.
Yeah, so much has changed in the period of just, 8 days? We're talking here.
Sounds about right, yeah.
It's been a very short haul, and it's obviously been a rapid-fire effort to get these ads up with the new political reality we are facing. In the meantime, of course, as we consider them running in swing
extending
states
its fall here.
like
It's
Arizona,
down over 1%
there's also
now.
some congressional primaries in that state we're watching, and we'll have more ahead with John Seaton.
Happy primary day, by the way. We haven't gotten to that yet. Michelle Giamrisco will be with us as we...
So we're seeing a sell-off in the world's largest tech companies, sending the indexes down in afternoon trade now, with traders bracing earnings from tech giants as well as central bank decisions upcoming this week. That'll be key in shaping the trajectory for the markets. So most shares in the S&P 500 rose, but renewed tech weakness is weighing down the gauge. So Nvidia down on some 6.5% after a $2.3 trillion NASDAQ 100 wipeout. Investors also again awaiting Microsoft earnings after the close today, amid concerns that the firms aren't yet seeing returns from artificial intelligence. So its numbers will set the scene for reports from other heavyweights this week, with markets also gearing up for Wednesday's FOMC decision.
53 points, lower now by 2%. 10-year yield 4.12%, the 2-year 4.34%. Spot gold up just about 85 cents the ounce right now, up 0.8%, I should say, up $21 the ounce, 24.05 on spot gold. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.6%, 75.31 a barrel, and to be clear again, gold up by 0.9%, 24.09. Big tech sell-off underway right now. All eyes on Microsoft after the close of trading. The first of 4 mega-cap tech names reporting this week. Microsoft down now by 2%. Meta Platforms reports tomorrow, down 1.8%. Apple and Amazon on Thursday. Apple right now down 0.9%, and Amazon trading lower by 2%. Bottom line here, a lot of selling. The Dow just turning turning negative right now. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down now by 6. S&P, to put it all in context, down by 1.1%. Balance of Power continues. Another busy day in Washington. Back we go once again. Your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
A busy day in Washington, indeed. Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. Of course, Washington is where you'll find myself, Kaylee Lyons, and Joe Matthew today. Where you'll find the vice president, at least later on today, is in the key swing state of Georgia. She's getting set to hold a rally in Atlanta, a rally in which, by the way, the rapper Megan Thee Stallion will be attending. She, of course, is courting certain demographics with this trip today, and she's also trying to build her profile across many of these swing states with some ads, a $50 million ad buy to be exact, that tell a little bit more about her story. Here's a taste.
The one thing Kamala Harris has always been: fearless. As a prosecutor, she put murderers and abusers behind bars. As California's Attorney General, she went after the big banks and won $20 billion for homeowners. And as vice president, she took on the big drug companies to cap the cost of insulin for seniors.
Just a taste of that first ad, and to Kaylee's point earlier, it's backed by $12 million, at least to start. Rather, that was the Trump ad buy. This one had a $50 million backing, so it's going to be everywhere. If you're living in a swing state, you're not going to be able to hide from that. We'll give you a taste of the new Trump ad, which clearly paints a different picture of Kamala Harris. But we start our conversation now with Michelle Jamrisco, Bloomberg senior reporter and White House editor, with her view on the campaign. Michelle, it's great to see you as we turn our attention to Georgia, interestingly. This narrative of Republicans expanding the map.
So according to the Nikkei, the central bank also looks to decide by how much and how fast to reduce its monthly purchases of the Japanese government bonds. So again, according to the Nikkei there, the central bank also looks to decide by how much and how fast to reduce its monthly purchases of Japanese government bonds.
Pennsylvania triumvirate. And now we're looking at a very different triumvirate. They're expanding into Georgia, maybe Nevada, Arizona. So looking at some of those Sun Belt states. And part of that is what you all were talking about earlier, kind of appealing to new voting blocs that have already shown rampant support for Kamala Harris, namely women voters, younger voters, and people of color. So today, Atlanta being a very strong voting bloc center for people of color especially, this is a fitting coming out party site for Kamala Harris. This is the first earnest rally that she'll have as campaigning for president.
Well, it's interesting to consider her efforts in the Sun Belt, because in Georgia specifically, there is no potential vice presidential candidate from Georgia that we understand she's considering. We thought she was considering another Sun Belt state governor in Roy Cooper. He took himself out of the running in a statement last night. So that just leaves Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona, if she's targeting those states in particular.
Yeah, that's really keeping us on edge. Are they going to play the VP card to a battleground, a map expansion a play, or is it going to be someone who just gets along with her well, or just feeds into some sort of personality dynamic, or fills another gap that they believe that they might have? And that's really up in the air. That's keeping us on edge for the next several days.
Yeah, it's an interesting attempt here to begin identifying the candidate, which obviously, coming off of Trump-Biden, everyone knew everything or thought they did about both of them. This is an opportunity now to frame Kamala Harris in a slightly different light. The Trump campaign is going to work overtime to keep her from doing that. But what does this new sort of biographical approach tell us about the messaging we'll hear in the next couple of weeks?
Well, I think you're consistently hearing, if there's one thing, the whole prosecutor versus felon dynamic. I mean, as you played the ad, of course, it's called Fearless. They're leaning into this idea of Kamala Harris as a fighter, not just as a fighter in her prosecutorial past as Attorney General of California, but also, she wants to kind of inherit what the Biden campaign constantly talked about, is I'm a fighter for you, I'm a fighter for the middle class, I'm a fighter for the workers, all these constituencies that they're trying to kind of shore up, including in the blue wall states, but also in others, and then show that, what, as they call it, the split screen, the starkly different vision that the Trump campaign might have. So it's interesting to me, though, when we talk about going to Atlanta, this is a battleground that Trump and Vance are going to visit this weekend, and again, with key voting blocs in the forefront, you talk about appeals to black voters. Trump is also going to speak to the National Association of Black Journalists this week. I mean, he's clearly trying to compete for the same voting blocks that Kamala Harris is seizing on as she becomes the presidential nominee.
Well, and we talk about competing. Obviously, they'll be competing for airtime as well, which is why these major ad buys are so crucial. Considering the fundraising figures we've seen the Harris campaign put up already, more than $200 million compared to our knowledge of what the Trump campaign is working with. What does that suggest about the way in which we'll be seeing money be spent in some of these key media markets?
They're really papering the airways. I mean, we saw it from the Biden campaign as well, even though they were kind of, depleting cash towards the end of that and leading up to the Biden dropout. So we'll have to see how these play. I mean, there's certainly, it was not lost on us that the audiences that they're targeting in the battleground states, but you'll see these ads if you're watching the Olympics, you'll see these ads if you're watching Bachelorette or The Daily Show, some of the biggest, shows on television. So they're clearly just trying to get eyeballs on who is Kamala Harris and how do they want to define her, because we're still in that early stage of introducing her.
All right, Bloomberg's Michelle Jambrisco, thank you so much as we keep track of the millions of dollars that are being spent in advertising. There's other stories we're keeping track of as well, though, including escalating tension, at least in the Middle East, in the aftermath of a rocket attack that killed 12 young people in an Israeli-occupied territory over the weekend, and a vow from Israel, at least the Prime Minister Netanyahu, to respond in a harsh way. We now have a red headline crossing the terminal that Israel has struck near Hezbollah's Shura Council in Beirut. This is according to the National News Agency of Lebanon. This is a story we will continue to follow. The IDF spokesperson saying that the IDF targeted in Beirut the commander responsible for the murder of those children in that rocket attack this weekend, Joe.
Yeah, this is something we spent quite a bit of time on yesterday, wondering the extent to which Benjamin Netanyahu would choose to respond. We're getting a bit of a sense of this now, but it's just unfolding as we speak here, and we'll keep you posted over the course of this hour here on Balance of Power as we survey the landscape in this presidential campaign as the ad wars begin. We gave you a taste of the Kamala Harris ad that just started running today, a biographical ad, an attempt to introduce her all over again to the nation. Donald Trump wants to remind everyone of Kamala Harris's record in his ad that's now up in 6 swing states. Here's a taste of that one.
This is America's border czar, and she's failed us. Under Harris, over 10 million illegally here. 250,000 Americans dead from fentanyl. Brutal migrant crimes. And ISIS now here.
So let's consider more the states in which this border message may resonate most clearly, including states like Arizona, a state that our next guest knows quite well. John Seaton is here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. He's founding partner and CEO at Echo Canyon Consulting and a Republican strategist. John, great to see you here in Washington. Thank you for being with us. We, of course, want to talk to you about the Arizona congressional primaries that are happening today as well. But if we could first begin with the landscape in what is a battleground state with Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, knowing that Harris does have this perceived weakness on the border. How does that play on the ground in Arizona?
It's a huge deal in Arizona. Every single survey that you see, the number one issue, not just for Republican primary voters, but really for general election voters as well, is the border. It's an out-of-control, perceived as an out-of-control crisis. It's top of mind for voters, whether you are in southern Arizona, right near the border in Yuma, or up in Maricopa County, where the bulk of the vote is. Voters are very concerned with what's going on down at the southern border.
How do voters in Arizona then associate Senator Kelly with this issue? Because there's been a narrative that, hey, she could pick Kelly and maybe pick up Arizona. He could run defense for her on the border. Or are they criticizing him on this issue? Where does he stand in Arizonans' minds?
So far, I think Senator Kelly has actually done a very good job kind of staying out of the border controversy, if you will. I think part of it is having Democrats in the White House. A lot of the attention is focused on them. Sure. Senator Kelly happens to be the most popular politician in Arizona right now. So as Kamala Harris is taking a look at him, I definitely think he could be seen as an asset to her ticket.
Well, if she were to choose him as her vice presidential nominee, does that make Arizona borderline unwinnable for Trump? Just how does that change the dynamics?
He still has a very, very strong base in Arizona, especially in some of the rural areas, and even in some of the exurban, further away from Phoenix and Maricopa County. He still has a huge amount of support. So I expect Arizona to be very close. It'll be a battleground state, especially if she does pick Senator Kelly.
Well, he has such a strong base that he's made 2 endorsements in the same race. And I'm really confused on this. Arizona's 8th congressional district, we thought Blake Masters had can you explain to me how you get 2 endorsements in the same race. So basically Donald Trump is saying in the 8th Congressional District, vote your conscience because both options are great.
So in 2022, he endorsed both men in separate races.
Yes.
Yeah. Mr. Hamadeh in the Attorney General race and Blake Masters in the U.S. Senate race. He got in very early for Abe Hamadeh in this congressional district race. But Blake Masters hasn't taken his foot off the gas, not just touting his support of what he calls the America First agenda, but also really strongly trying to court Trump supporters and the former president himself. And so over the weekend,
confirmation from
Donald
the
Trump
Israeli
did say,
military
hey,
now as they carried out a strike in Beirut in retaliation for the attack on Golan Heights. So that is the Israeli military making a strike in Lebanon,
Well, we should also
in
consider
Beirut.
that his vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, came out and endorsed Blake Masters prior to this. Peter Thiel likes him as well. We know of the Thiel-Vance relationship, so maybe we want to consider those dynamics as well. So all that said, John, how do you think this goes down? Who do you think comes out ahead?
Well, keep in mind in Arizona, there's a huge number of people who vote early. And so probably about as many as 2/3 of the votes already. So it may be a little bit late. I'm sure the Masters campaign would tell you, boy, we really wish this could have come out, a week, 2 weeks earlier. It's still not over. I just took a look at the numbers before we came on. About 3,000 votes have been cast thus far on Election Day in the 8th Congressional District. So there's still, several thousand votes yet to be cast, but a lot of those votes were already in the bank prior to the endorsement.
This got really ugly and personal attacks. Some of the images that Blake Masters put out of Abe Hamadeh. What happens post election here, and how damaged is the loser's reputation going to be?
So it's a safe district. So whoever wins this primary will almost certainly be the next member of Congress in Arizona 8. But I think whoever finishes second will have a lot of repair work to do. These are both very young men with very, very strong political aspirations going forward. Only one of them is going to win. So yeah, there will probably be some repair work that's needed, and it'll be interesting to see how that, what form that takes.
Well, and of course, that's not the only race that bears watching today. There's also the Senate Republican primary, in which we've been really casting this race in the general as Kari Lake versus Ruben Gallego. That is what everybody's expectation is. But Kari Lake still has to win this primary. By what margin does she need to win it, though, when it's considered her to be so much so the front runner?
I think most folks like me are looking at about the 60% number. That if she is under 60, that's probably a concern. I expect her to eclipse it, but there's a sizable chunk of Republicans who are still not fully comfortable with Kari Lake. Many, many more are enthusiastic supporters. So I think if you look at that 60% number, if she eclipses that number, I think that's a reasonable bar for her to.
She's up by 10 or 12 though here, right? She's in a pretty good position going into this election. Is that right?
Yeah, she's in the primary. She's strongly favored to win. Her opponent, Sheriff Mark Lamb, very good guy. Never really got any kind of momentum behind him, so I expect her to win comfortably. That's one that should be called pretty early. So what do people have? What's the taste left in people's mouths in Arizona after that brutal governor's race, which she, I think, still claims was stolen, right? I think that Republicans never really left her. Again, the majority of Republicans were with her in the general in 2022, and whether or not they believe that she actually won that race, they've stuck with her. Remember, she was also a very popular newscaster for over 20 years in Arizona, so she has a strong following, and I expect generally, as we say, people are going to put on their jerseys. Republicans are going to stick with her. Ruben Gallego is running a strong campaign, but is a very, very progressive member of Congress.
70 counterparties take $367.054 billion at the Federal Reserve Corporation.
Well, something we've been talking about much more widely in states other than Arizona, but certainly inclusive of Arizona as well, is now that it's Kamala Harris who is going to be leading the Democratic ticket, what tail effects that may have down the ballot. Do the odds look better for Ruben Gallego than they would have otherwise if it was still Joe Biden who was the Democratic nominee?
What I think you're seeing in Arizona and really in a lot of other swing states is just a lot more enthusiasm from Democrats more recently. I think some of that may be that this is still very new. It's just less than 2 weeks old since Kamala Harris became the de facto nominee. But I really think that you're seeing more enthusiasm. And while every vote still only counts the same, it does mean that these are people maybe more likely to go knock on doors, make phone calls, pound in yard signs, things of that nature. And in a close race, every little bit like that makes a difference.
As a Republican, we were talking to you in Milwaukee about the pick of J.D. Vance. Do you care about who Kamala Harris picks for running mate?
I think it's a big story for a few days. You need somebody who is going to be an articulate kind of messenger for your vision as the nominee, someone who maybe can be helpful in some of those swing states, someone who voters believe can actually do the job of president if, God forbid, anything were to happen to the president. And so I think that's what she'll be looking at. Maybe marginal difference if a Mark Kelly gets picked or a Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania. But at the end of the day, I think most voters really look at who's at the top of the ticket.
He's the founding partner, CEO at Echo Canyon Consulting. Longtime Republican strategist John Seaton with us here at the table. Great to pick your brain for a little while, John. Thank you so much for joining us on Arizona primary day, no less. I guess we'll be picking through results around this time tomorrow.
Indeed, we will. Hard to believe we're still in the middle of primary season.
Yeah.
But I guess everything has been constantly changing in this entire electoral cycle, and congressional races are no exception.
Well, we'll see if the Trump-endorsed candidate wins or the Trump-endorsed candidate. That will be the contest tonight, literally, we make our way through this.
He basically gets to commend his record on endorsements either way, right?
He's a winner either way, amazingly. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons. It's the fastest show in politics on Bloomberg TV and radio. We'll assemble our panel next. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano on the way with the latest on the campaign. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg Power Players is back this September. As the top names in tennis take the court over in Queens, we're convening the best of the sports world right here in New York. We'll host some of the most influential voices in the business and identify what happens next for players and fans in this multi-billion-dollar global industry. Bloomberg Power Players, September 5th. Register now at BloombergLive.com/powerplayers.
Bloomberg covers the world with unmatched reach and resources. From more than 120 countries, the moment news breaks, 24 hours a day. Bloomberg, context changes everything. The names that move markets are on Bloomberg.
We've seen story after story about companies delisting from the London Stock Exchange, listing in New York, listing in Europe. I want to turn that around. I want Britain to be the place of choice to make an IPO, to grow your business. That's why I welcome the reforms that the FCA put in place last week. It's also why I'm determined to change our pension system so we can keep more businesses here in Britain.
Bloomberg, context changes everything. Bloomberg loves earnings.
I know it's like your Super Bowl, right?
I can't wait. It's like opening presents in the morning.
All right, it will be exciting.
Nobody covers earnings like Bloomberg. It's the world's second largest economy with a growing influence in global affairs. But geopolitical uncertainties, deflationary pressures, and questions about foreign investment linger. Bloomberg, the China Show, brings you the unmatched expertise you need to keep track of breaking news, in-depth market analysis, and the most influential newsmakers in and around China. Bloomberg, the China Show. Weekdays at 9 a.m. Hong Kong time, right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything. Bloomberg Surveillance covers the latest in global markets and the political events that influence your world. Join Jonathan Farrell, Lisa Abramowitz, and Anne-Marie Hordern only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
It's the countdown to the market open as we bring you the first trades across Europe.
We'll debate the most important stories and what will drive the big investment decisions throughout the morning. I'm Guy Johnson.
I'm Kriti Gupta.
And I'm Anna Edwards. Join us every weekday morning for the opening trade, live at 7 a.m. here in London.
Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
It's 121 on Wall Street from Bloomberg World Headquarters. I'm Charlie Pellet. We begin with a developing story and an update on the Middle East. Israel's military has struck Beirut suburbs, aiming at a Hezbollah commander in response to a rocket attack on Saturday in the Golan Heights that killed 12 people. Now, the Israel Defense Forces says it targeted, quote, the commander responsible for the murder of the children in Majd al-Shams and the killing of numerous additional Israeli civilians. Again, developing story. These headlines breaking right now. Bloomberg Television and Radio will have more coming up. It is a mixed day for the U.S. stock market. We got a sell-off in the world's biggest tech companies, sending stocks down. S&P now lower by 42, down 0.8%. NASDAQ is down 270, a decline there of 0.6%. The 10-year, 4.14%. The 2-year yield, 4.35%. Gold up $22 the ounce to $24.06, up 0.9%. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.3%, $74.86 for a barrel of WTI. Sprouts Farmers Market shares are surging after the natural and organic food retailer boosted its full-year projections for comparable sales and profit. And a mass food poisoning outbreak at the office of TikTok parent company ByteDance in Singapore has led to the hospitalization of nearly 60 people, according to local media. Again, recapping U.S. stocks trading mix, the Dow holding on to a gain of 0.2%, S&P down by 0.8. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet in New York, thank you so much. In Washington, both Joe and myself are paying attention to what's happening abroad as well. Charlie just mentioned the headlines. I will repeat them for you. Israel saying that it has struck targets in Beirut, specifically targeting a Hezbollah commander in response to the rocket attack that killed 12 young people in the Israel-occupied Golan Heights this weekend. The Israeli Defense Forces saying that it targeted the commander responsible for the murder of those children, and goes on to say the killing of numerous additional Israeli civilians. The Israeli defense minister saying that Hezbollah crossed a red line. Of course, there has been a lot of concern, including concern from the U.S. about the way in which tensions may escalate between Israel and Hezbollah, and if that could engulf the Middle East in wider conflict, Joe. But I guess we'll see what reaction is from the international community as to whether or not this was an escalatory or proportionate response from Israel.
Well, that's been the question more than once when it comes to Israel in its war with Hamas, its retaliation against Iran, which it invokes. By the way, there are questions about to what extent Iran would be involved in a conflict involving Hezbollah and to what extent the U.S. would be at Israel's side. So this is just breaking. To Kaylee's point, it's important to note this first emerged from state-run media in Beirut, but we have heard from the IDF on this, and that statement is what brings this to a red headline on the terminal, Kaylee.
Yeah, and we'll have more coming up in just a few minutes with Natasha Hall. She is a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies Middle East program. And of course, we have to consider how foreign policy is impacting the presidential race as well, and to what extent specifically Vice President Kamala Harris is attached to or can remove herself from the Middle East policy of the Biden administration.
We heard yesterday from John Kirby. Remember, there's no sunlight between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris when it comes to Israel policy. Let's assemble our panel for their take on this and a lot more with our eyes on the campaign trail. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis join us, Bloomberg Politics contributors here on Balance of Power. Jeannie, of course, political science professor at Iona University. Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital. Jeannie, I wonder your thoughts at a moment like this with headlines like these and some of the concerns that we have heard from moderates, conservative-leaning voters who might consider a Kamala Harris when it comes to geopolitics, when it comes to foreign policy and where she's going to land on an issue like Israel. How should they interpret that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are still waiting to hear. You're right. She has been described as having no sunlight between her and Joe Biden on this issue. Knowing how Kamala Harris has comported herself over the last several years, I don't suspect she will jump out ahead in any way of the president as it pertains to an issue as divisive as this. But this is, you know, something that we all as Americans have long feared, an escalation. And that's why this breaking news is just so, it's not surprising, but it is very, very concerning and should be to all Americans and, of course, everybody in the Middle East.
Rick, we were speaking earlier this hour about the ad buy we've seen from the Trump campaign, specifically targeting Kamala Harris and her record on the border and immigration. Is there room as well for Trump and Republicans to attack her on foreign policy?
It's not that big a gap, to exploit as it is in immigration and on the economy, which is, by the way, another very important issue, especially in the swing states. With the war in the Middle East, I would say it's the lower 10 issues on most voters' minds. So investing in that, I think, is a low rate of return when it comes to politics. That being said, I think the onus is more on Harris to define herself when it comes to foreign policy. I mean, there is a question mark on what kind of commander-in-chief she would make. We know Joe Biden, we know Donald Trump, and I think that it's up to Harris now to actually find opportunities like this to make a statement in regards to how she sees things. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. Israel is a democracy. Hezbollah lobbed a missile that killed, a dozen children in Israeli territory. This is unacceptable. I think she can frame it in such a way that doesn't get her out of her comfort level in discussing the Middle East affairs, but also makes her look like she, in addition to being a prosecutor and attorney general, can actually command the troops.
Well, Rick just said a lot, Jeannie. How strong does Kamala Harris need to speak to this when she is at the podium today in Georgia?
I think she's going to need to speak to this, and she did last week, and I think she will do it again. She did last week after she met with Benjamin Netanyahu. But again, I think she is going to have to walk a fine line. She's got to be very careful that she doesn't get in the way of Joe Biden and the administration. She is on the campaign trail. They are in office. But I do think she needs to clarify where she stands, and I think she will, and she will repeat what she said last year. One thing to just add to that, as it pertains to her VP pick, there is a way in which fast-moving events can change things. And I'm not saying this event would, but should she look for somebody with stronger foreign policy chops than she may bring to the table? The short list doesn't contain many people, at least as far as we know, in that grouping. But there has been some quiet talk about that being something of a less than a weakness, if you can say, of hers. She is the sitting vice president, but should she look in that direction is something that, may be simmering underneath if these events, continue to escalate and blossom.
Well, Rick, let's expand on Jeannie's point here, how the vice president could potentially supplement or complement her on foreign policy. Who is best qualified for that? Is it Senator Mark Kelly as a veteran?
Oh, yeah. Well, not just a veteran, but Senator Mark Kelly has been serving on the Armed Services Committee in the Senate and has a long record. He was a former fighter pilot. We know astronaut. Certainly within the group that the media is reporting is her shortlist, he has substantially more robust credentials on foreign policy, national security, and intelligence than any other of the candidates. And look, we are in a dangerous world. It will be a topic at some point in this campaign. There is a potential for an October surprise because we see them happen more frequently these days. And so, I think that if you are concerned about her when it comes to national security issues, having someone like Mark Kelly on the ticket really goes a long way to allaying those concerns.
Well, it's really interesting the way news can impact the way we look at things here, Jeannie. It was all about Shapiro in Pennsylvania in our last hour when we were talking about the Veep stakes. Then these headlines hit. Could this impact her decision on a running mate?
I don't think at this point, but it could if events continue to escalate. I would note that we have heard that one person, in addition to Governor Cooper, who took themselves out of the running, was Admiral McRaven. And he is somebody just like, different, but similar to, as Rick was describing, the senator from Arizona, who obviously has a background in foreign policy, in the military, being an admiral, a former commander of the special operations. But we understand he took himself out of consideration. If that reporting is true, you wonder, does somebody else of his type get put back in that, short list that we keep hearing about? So to your point, again, these events can change the way that we all look at things. And by the way, we should just mention J.D. Vance was chosen. And of course, he does have a military background. He was in the Senate. He is in the Senate briefly, but does he have the foreign policy chops that Republicans are looking for is another question to be raised.
Well, Jeannie, obviously we're looking at this right now through the lens of the people who are competing to be president. We do have a president right now. His name is Joe Biden, and he may be a one-termer, but he is still technically in charge here. He is the commander-in-chief. To what extent, Jeannie, is Joe Biden still going to be able to influence what happens in the Middle East, to advise Israel, and to the extent to which it should retaliate or not? Or has his power to do so greatly diminished because of his decision not to seek a second term?
You know, it's difficult being a lame duck. I think we saw that live last week when Netanyahu not only visited the president, but the vice president and also his opponent, Donald Trump. So, you know, that is the reality. It is more difficult for him, being Joe Biden, to command the attention that he did just a week ago. It is more difficult for him to you know, sort of put out a profile there as to what he expects and to have the energy and support of Congress potentially to do what he needs to do. But that said, he is still the sitting president, and his words do have weight. And so I think, you know, the question is going to be how much is he supported by the vice president in this? I think it'll be a lot. And of course, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, who may remain very strong on this, not to mention the CIA director.
All right, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, our signature panel with us today on Balance of Power. Many thanks for the insights here with breaking news. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons. If you are just joining us here on Bloomberg TV, radio, or on YouTube, Israeli officials now confirming the fact that there has been a retaliatory strike against Hezbollah in the suburbs of Beirut. We're looking at 3 rockets here, Kaylee, following the rocket attack on the soccer field in the Golan Heights that claimed the lives of 12 young people. This is just breaking now. It's something just emerging this hour, so we want to be careful with the limited amount of information we have, but a great opportunity to bring in the voice of an expert. We're joined by Natasha Hall, Senior Fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies Middle East Program. Natasha, it's good to see you. Thank you for joining us here today on Bloomberg.
Thanks for having me.
There was a question about what the response would be. Does this seem proportionate in the outset?
So I would say that I was speaking to diplomats just a bit earlier than this, and there had been some evacuation of the Dahia, or this suburban area of Beirut that is also a Hezbollah stronghold. So many people in the area knew that this might be the targeted area and had been evacuating for some time. That said, we should still be aware of the civilian casualties that might be at play, because this is a neighborhood after all. But I would say that this was something that was to be expected.
And of course, there is a lot we don't know, including what casualties may have resulted from this. We just know that Israel was targeting a Hezbollah commander, but of course we know that Israel often targets specific people, and there is more collateral damage that comes with it. We just had a headline from N12 TV citing an Israeli official saying that they are not looking to start a regional war. Does that just depend, though, on the response that Hezbollah may deliver to this? Israel has made its move.
I would say that for Hezbollah and for Israel, a regional escalation is not in the cards, or at least they don't want it to be in the cards. That said, there could always be an escalation, essentially by accident, which is essentially what happened with the Majlis Shams attack that you mentioned that killed 12 young people so recently. This was a mistake, essentially. It seems like it was a strike that was a mistake. And so it's just something like that, just any kind of spark that could lead to a wider conflagration, and that's what we're all very, very worried about. Right now, I think Joe Biden and others within the administration are working very, very hard not to see that regional escalation, because that would essentially mean a two-front war for Israel as well.
What is Iran telling Hezbollah right now?
I would say that Iran also does not want much of an escalation at this point. It is getting major political points within the region, and I would say in the world, for everything that the Israeli officials are doing pretty much on their own within Israel in terms of what's the horrific humanitarian catastrophe going on in Gaza right now, but also what's going on within Israel in terms of the political turmoil there. So it doesn't seem to me that Iran would really need to do much to damage Israel's standing any further.
So if this is a matter of incentives to not escalate further, whose incentive is greater to be holding back here? Is it Israel or Iran and its proxies?
So that's a good question. So you're saying Israel, but really what we're talking about is a handful of Israeli politicians.
The Netanyahu government.
Right, the Netanyahu government, which I think is different than necessarily what the interests of Israelis or Israel would be. And that's concerning, and that's been concerning for U.S. officials for some time, that Netanyahu might prolong a war, even expand a war so that he could maintain control within the government. That said, I think the Iranian officials will probably try to mitigate the larger consequences of this war, but also use all of the internal turmoil that's going on in Israel and what's going on in Gaza to really build up more political points here. That said, you're poking the bear being Hezbollah, and there might have to be other retaliatory strikes depending on the extent of the attacks that we've just been talking about.
Well, that's a great point, that we might not be done here,
right.
Which is why we do want to be cautious with our analysis in the early going. But what does this mean for Hamas? What does this mean for Gaza at this point, as everyone turns their attention to something potentially more in the north? There's much to be resolved still. We've broken down our temporary pier. They're still struggling to get humanitarian aid into an area that you just qualified as a humanitarian crisis.
What is happening right now in Gaza is horrific, and we've just heard reporting just last week that there's been evidence that polio might be spreading within Gaza as well, which should be terrifying not just for Palestinians but for the larger region as well. Speaking of regional escalation, this would have been the moment that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and the administration could have potentially used to increase humanitarian aid and access into Gaza to mitigate a larger escalation, actually, an epidemic in a sense. We haven't seen that yet, but that needs to happen. There needs to be a ceasefire in order for actual proper response to this, potential threat to Israel as well. But we have not seen that yet because there's been a lot of other distractions in the north, but also within Israel itself. And so it's unclear after Netanyahu's speech last week in Congress whether there will be a ceasefire deal.
Well, and we know that negotiators were working on that in recent days. They were meeting in Rome. We heard from the Prime Minister's office, Netanyahu's that Hamas was changing some of its demands. What do you think the real prospect is of a ceasefire agreement, temporary or otherwise, being reached in the near term when they have been trying at this effort for months now?
Right. I mean, and we were seriously talking about a ceasefire deal in February, and we're 10 months in at this point now. I think that it really depends on how much pressure is applied by external elements like the United States or Iran on the warring parties at this point. There was a recent poll actually in Israel that Israelis are primarily blaming Netanyahu more than even Hamas for the lack of a hostage deal at this point. There's a great deal of frustration with Netanyahu on delivering the hostages at this point. And so that could be the political pressure that's needed for Netanyahu to get a plan. Also, Kamala Harris's speech last week was very powerful in the sense that she made it known that it was time for a deal to happen. And so I think that if there is mounting pressure, especially from the north now as well, also within Israel, that Israel might need to decide to take it down a notch in other areas that could potentially be Gaza, and aim for some kind of ceasefire. But it might be too early to tell.
Well, it's great to have you with us. Natasha Hall, Senior Fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies Middle East Program. A great moment to have you with us here. Unfortunately, not the best news today. We'd like to stay in touch with you on this as we learn more.
Thank you so much.
I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines in Washington. Kaylee, that ceasefire is something that remains elusive, but something that we will continue to talk about as long as it remains possible. We've got an important conversation ahead with Senator Marsha Blackburn, who's been awfully busy today.
Yeah, we have a lot to pay attention to here in Washington. The Senate is still in town, and we're voting today. on the Kids Online Safety Act. So we'll have much more on that coming up. But first, let's get a check on the market action. Charlie Pellet has a look up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Kaylee Lyons. Indeed, a very mixed market right now with the Dow Jones Industrial Average holding on to a gain of 0.2%. However, we have got the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index all in the red. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares is holding on to a gain of just under 0.1%. But the S&P right now down 38, a drop there of 0.7%. Dow Industrials up 91, a gain of 0.2%. The NASDAQ Composite Index down 250 points, a wave of tech selling lower by 1.4%. 10-year yield right now at 4.14% with a 2-year 4.35%. Spot gold up $21, the ounce up 0.9%, 24.05, while West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.1%, 75 even a barrel on WTI. The big event after the close of trading today, Microsoft earnings, complete coverage on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Ahead of that report, Microsoft down now by 1.9%. It will be the first of 4 mega cap tech names reporting this week. Meta Platforms out tomorrow, down 0.7% right now. Apple and Amazon Thursday. Apple down 0.5%. Amazon down 1.3%. Also, cannot ignore Advanced Micro Devices. That too reports after the close of trading again today. So Microsoft down 1.8%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Very busy day. And once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
Charlie Pellet, thank you as ever, keeping tabs on the markets for us here on the fastest show in politics. Thanks for joining here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. Indeed, I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington, where, Kaylee, things are happening today. The House may be gone, but the Senate has actually been busy. There are a couple of important things taking place today. One of them brings us back to the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. An important hearing today, a joint hearing, the Senate Judiciary and Homeland Security hearings with the new boss, the acting, at least, boss, acting Secret Service Director Ron Rowe. And also an important vote, Kaylee, as the Senate passes legislation to protect kids online. We've talked about this quite a bit, for instance, with Senator Marsha Blackburn. Unclear where this goes in the House, but this is the first time, really, that lawmakers have managed to get their arms around this.
Yeah, and in a bipartisan way, the vote was 91-3. To approve this measure, which will essentially impose sweeping safety and privacy requirements for children and teenagers on social media platforms. So clearly a bipartisan effort. It will now get sent to the House, where, of course, they don't actually return to Washington until September 9th, and we'll quickly be talking about a funding fight to avoid a government shutdown after the fiscal year expires on September 30th. So let's talk about the realistic prospects for this specific legislation and bring in one of its supporters. As Joe mentioned, the Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee is with us now from Capitol Hill. Senator, thank you so much and welcome back to Bloomberg TV and Radio. I'm sure you're pleased with the results of this vote in the Senate today. Have you had discussions with your colleagues in the House about what its future may be in the other chamber?
Yes, indeed. I have had those discussions. We have bipartisan leaders in the House and broad bipartisan support. You have Congresswoman Castor, Congressman Bilirakis, and they're the leads in the House. And there is broad bipartisan support across the body of the House for pushing this forward. I think that you will see House leadership move it to the floor for a vote, and we will get this to the president's desk. The reason for that is there has been an unbelievable coalition of parents and school principals and educators and pediatricians and kids that have said there need to be protections in the virtual space so that we are not subjected to some of these algorithmic rabbit trails that kids end up on when they are in the virtual space. And you know, it's so interesting. Parents and kids alike have realized when you're online, you are the product. And the longer they keep you online, the more scrolling you do, the richer that data is, the more money they make. And that is why these social media companies, even though they've known what they were doing was addictive and was causing harm, they've continued to do it. They have put profits before our children.
Algorithmic rabbit trails. I like that, Senator. I remember distinctly on the 31st of January, and I know you do too, a remarkable moment in which Mark Zuckerberg was invited to, and he did stand up in a Judiciary Committee hearing, turn around and apologize to some of the folks who were there. Quote, "It's terrible," he said. "No one should have to go through the things that your families have suffered," as Josh Hawley pressed him about whether he would apologize directly to parents.
Right.
How does this legislation prevent other parents from ending up in that world?
Yes, what the legislation does is safety by design. This is a product design piece of legislation. Just as we have consumer protections in many products, this is putting those protections in place in the virtual space. It requires a duty of care. There's a toolbox for kids and parents. It opens the algorithmic black boxes. It has a portal to report bad actors in the virtual space. And then the social media platforms have to block or remove those bad actors. As we know, pedophiles, drug dealers, human traffickers, sex traffickers, cyber bullies are all utilizing this space to harm children. And in the physical world, you can't sell tobacco and alcohol or pornography to a child. You can't take them into a strip club. And people would say, why are there not protections in the virtual space? Because our children are exposed to this 24/7, 365. And this is that first step, and we look forward to the House quickly taking action and sending it to the President for signature.
Senator, we have seen when it comes to social media companies and the moderation of content, whomever that content is targeted towards, has raised some First Amendment questions. We've seen this in legal challenges that have gone all the way to the Supreme Court in its most recent term. Do you expect there to be any First Amendment issues with this piece of legislation that the social media companies may use to fight it?
This is not a speech bill. It is not a content bill. This is a product design bill, and we feel good about the placement. We have worked for over 3 years with stakeholders. We have worked with parents. We've worked with physicians and pediatricians, and no, I feel very good about where we have this legislation.
Senator Blackburn, we saw you in Milwaukee confronting the now former director of the Secret Service. Kimberly Cheadle has resigned her post following the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. I know you had some very stern words for her captured on video. Our viewers on Bloomberg TV can see you essentially chasing her down the hall with a piece of your mind. You had a chance today to talk with at least her temporary replacement, the acting Secret Service Director, Ron Rowe, who was there with the Deputy FBI Director, talking about the cleanup here, essentially. Senator, did you hear what you needed to hear to believe, to have faith that the Secret Service can correct the mistakes that led to this?
What we were today, Director Rowe described himself as a change agent. I think we will see how he is going to execute that change. I did ask him about the whistleblower email that was released and made public today, where the whistleblower says, you know, it's a CYA. That is the mission at the Secret Service. Everybody's practicing that. And Director Rowe has been a career guy. He's been there for 25 years. We will see if he is actually able to do some change and restore some trust and some faith. And I asked him if he was going to allow these whistleblowers who are complaining about the culture that has developed there at the Secret Service to come forward and tell their story and to work with us as we try to make certain the Secret Service is able to do their job. They obviously did not do their job in Butler, Pennsylvania. And then also concerns with the FBI. And Deputy Director Abate was with us. I questioned him on the social media accounts. There had been some confusion around that, a little bit of contradiction coming from the FBI. There's an account when Crooks was younger, And then there is the Gab account that takes us up closer to the time that he carried out the assassination attempt. But how in the world they expect people to have trust in the FBI when former President Trump was allowed by the Secret Service to take the stage at 6 o'clock, when at 5:51 they knew they had a potential threat within range of him in that outer perimeter. It is just unbelievable. And how could they leave a water tower unattended? And the Secret Service has 31 individuals, former presidents, current president, vice president, families, and some others that have received death threats, a total of 31 people. These individuals need to know that the Secret Service is there to protect their lives and that they're going to be well tended. And as you saw in the hearing, there is much agreement on a bipartisan basis about how the Secret Service has moved forward in recent months.
Well, certainly, Senator, between that hearing and the votes today, it's been a busy day in your chamber, and your work is not yet done for the week. We understand on Thursday, you'll have a chance to vote for a tax deal that passed the House with a massive bipartisan majority, in part tax breaks for businesses with an extension of the child tax credit. Considering you were just talking to us about protecting children in the online space, will you pass up the opportunity to potentially protect some of them from poverty?
And what we want to do is make certain that we get this bill right. This bill has some serious flaws, and I think what you will do is see, I don't think they'll get 60 votes to move forward with this. There are issues with this bill, and let's get it right. Let's make those tax cuts permanent with that R&D tax credit, and then of course we've got opportunity zones, new market credits, work opportunity credits. We are far from ready to move forward with that bill.
Senator, we've only got about a minute left here. I don't want to set you up to cut you off, but I have to ask you about Israel's response to Hezbollah. You said last weekend, quote, "We must stand with Israel following the attack that claimed the lives of 12 young people." We now have seen at least the initial response with the rocket attack against an area in the suburbs of Beirut. Is that appropriate from your view?
You know, I want to make certain that Israel has what they need to protect themselves, and we also know that Iran is the main sponsor of terrorism globally. We know what they have done to fund, to equip, to train Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, ISIS in Iraq. And I think it would be appropriate for President Biden to step forward and put those sanctions President Trump had on Iran, put the sanctions back on so they are not able to sell their oil on the global stage.
Are you concerned that this is a proportionate attack, though, or response, I should say, Senator? Do you think Israel should do more to make a point to stop Hezbollah?
I want to make certain that Israel can defend itself. As you mentioned earlier, we've had a busy day. I have not looked at any of the detail around the attack. I learned about that from you all.
Understood. Well, it's kind of you to spend some time with us. As always, Senator Marsha Blackburn, the Republican from Tennessee, with a big vote today, a remarkable vote, as a matter of fact, Haley. It's not often we see numbers like this these days on Capitol Hill. We'll see what happens in the House.
Yeah, of course, we'll have to wait several weeks for that to come to fruition, as summer recess is already underway for the House, not yet for the Senate, though we'll be there by the end of this week. And of course, much still coming up this week and today as we look ahead to Kamala Harris's trip to Atlanta, Georgia, a critical swing state, as she continues her still nascent presidential campaign.
We'll be following her on the trail and have the latest on the Veep stakes and, of course, the latest in Israel coming up with a later edition of Balance of Power, 5 p.m. Washington time, here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. Bloomberg ETF IQ, Monday on Bloomberg.
You are also an owner, I should have pointed out, of 3 major sports teams.
That's right.
Right? And you're the first woman, as I understand it, the first woman to own 3 major, have a stake in 3 major sports teams. Is that right?
Yes, I'm going to say African American.
You were approached by the owner then of the, I guess, the Washington Wizards and the Washington Caps about maybe buying the Washington Mystics, which is the women's basketball team. And what did you say?
Well, first of all, Zay Poland. He did come to me and Susan O'Malley, and they said, Abe Poland says, look, I want you to be the face of the Washington Mystics. And I said, what do you mean be the face of? He says, I want you to buy this team. His health was failing. And I have to tell you, and a lot of women can understand this, we never get these opportunities. So that was the first thing that struck me, and I was flattered. I was really flattered. I said, well, Abe, what are the financials on this? And he handed them to me. He says, well, they're not making money. But I was still intrigued about team ownership.
People ask me all the time, what is the key to being a really good investor? And I tell them it's to surround yourself with and work with the best investors you can find. On Bloomberg Wealth, I'm going to take you to meet the greatest investors in the world, the people that I would like to have managing my money.
What we try to do is combine some of our insights from the fundamental business with external and data set signals. And I think that's a lot of times where the opportunity is.
Is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. I'm Carol Masser, along with Tim Stenivek, and let's get to the setup on this. It's kind of a Fed Tuesday. We'll get to that in just a moment. It is July 30th. It is a big, big week, though, for earnings, as several of the Magnificent Seven do report. We do have that Fed decision tomorrow, and then we've got some headlines continuing out of the Middle East.
Yeah, this is Israel's military struck Beirut, aiming at a Hezbollah leader in response to a rocket attack on Saturday in the Golan Heights that killed 12 young people. We have live footage coming out of Beirut from the Associated Press. We'll show you that in just a minute. Also coming up, Carol, that Fed decision. We got some thoughts ahead of that.
We do indeed. Is it really just about the September meeting, not tomorrow's decision? And maybe is it about Jackson Hole, which is in August? So a lot to kind of dig into there. Plus, we've got several members of the Mag 7 reporting this week, including tonight after the closing bell, Microsoft. So will the results kind of help turn the tide in what we've seen in a more than $2 trillion sell-off in the NASDAQ 100? So do we get some results from Microsoft later tonight, Tim, that kind of make people think a little bit differently, maybe not so negative on the AI trade?
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see just after 4 o'clock. Also coming up this hour, ahead of that, we got one of the most read stories on the Bloomberg terminal on billionaire Ken Griffin spending millions to put his stamp on Donald Trump's GOP.
All right, first up, folks, let's get to the trade on this Tuesday. Let's turn things over to Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much, Carol Masser. Indeed, very busy Tuesday. Lots of moving parts to these markets. Got to keep it locked in to Bloomberg Television and Radio. Right to the numbers here. Here's where we stand. Dow Industrials holding on to a gain now of 123 points, up 0.3%. S&P 500 index down 32 now, drop there of 0.6%. The NASDAQ Composite Index down 227, a decline right now of 1.3%. Tech selling off. The NASDAQ 100 index down 1.4%. But the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares higher now by 3 points, up by about 0.1%. 10-year yield 4.14% with a 2-year 4.35%. Gold now up $20 the ounce, 24.05, up 0.9%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil down now by 1.1%, 74.98 a barrel. And Brent, the global benchmark, 78.78, down by 1.3%. Bottom line here, stocks getting hit by a sell-off in the world's largest tech companies ahead of key central bank decisions. Bonds and gold climbing as traders rush for safety amid geopolitical risks. And of course, as Carol mentioned, all eyes on Microsoft after the close of trading. The first of 4 mega cap tech names reporting this week. Microsoft right now down 1.6%. Meta Platforms tomorrow down 0.5%. Apple and Amazon on Thursday. Apple now down by 0.3%. Amazon down 1.2%. Again, recapping, stocks lower. S&P now down 35, a drop of 0.6%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, that is your market setup on this Tuesday, July 30th. Let's get to some of that news out of the Middle East. Israel's military struck Beirut, aiming at a Hezbollah leader in response to a rocket attack that was over the weekend, Saturday specifically, in the Golan Heights that killed 12 young people. So let's get to it. Let's head to Tel Aviv. That's where we find Bloomberg News Israel Bureau Chief Ethan Bronner. Ethan, what do we know about the attack that just seemed to be moments ago?
Hi, Carol. Look, what you said is what we know. The name of the Hezbollah official appears to be Mohsen Shoker. The Israelis have not confirmed that, but that's coming out of Lebanon. The Israelis have confirmed to me that the person that they hit, and I don't know if the person is dead, is a very senior Hezbollah official. They argue that his elimination will be a major blow to Hezbollah, and they say further that they're not planning to escalate beyond this, and if there's escalation, it will be because of Hezbollah.
The retaliation in response to a rocket attack on Saturday in the Golan Heights that killed 12 young people. What do we know about that attack, Ethan?
Well, so Tim, that attack, that was Hezbollah. We're quite clear it was a 53 kilogram missile that hit this soccer field in which kids were playing. I mean, I don't think it's reasonable to assume that it was a purposeful hit. I think that they were aiming for an Israeli military position not far away, and failed. But 12 kids aged 10 to 16 were killed, and Israel has taken revenge or retaliation today for it. That's clear.
You know, the United States has come out agreeing with Israel that Hezbollah was culpable in terms of what the hit over the weekend, urging all sides to avoid any escalation. It feels like, though, that the two sides have been exchanging fire daily. It feels like escalation's already here.
Well, I mean, I think there's escalation. So there's been a slow, steady escalation for nearly 10 months, as you point out. I think the goal, at least on this side and probably on the other side, is for it not to devolve into a genuine war, which would bring in Iran and perhaps the United States and just be utterly destructive to both countries, certainly to Lebanon. The Israelis have been planning and studying targets in Lebanon for 15 or 16 years. I think the Hezbollah has 140 or 50,000 missiles that it can start shooting at the northern cities and even to Tel Aviv. And people would die in this country. There's no question about it. It would be a very devastating war. So both sides have the reasons to want to make their point and not enter an actual war.
You know, there's making points and there's escalation. I guess I don't always understand war because I feel like if there's a back and forth, even if they're targeting military sites, that to me says escalation. But help me understand the technicalities or specifics of war.
Look, we fortunately have grown up in a country and in an era with very little war on our homeland. So it is, in fact, a very foreign and very upsetting concept to us. In this part of the world, war is a little more part of the daily thrum and thrust of life. And war would mean that, I mean, right now, for example, the Israelis sent a drone and hit a building and killed a guy, they hope, or perhaps others, in the same way that a missile came into the Golan Heights
on Saturday, though that kind of exchange is distinct from the armies heading toward one another and an actual war, right? There's a difference.
Ethan, what now could we expect to see from the United States and other allies to help prevent a wider scale regional conflict
I mean, they've
to help
been on the
prevent
phone
something
with
from
all these
escalating?
guys. I'm sorry to interrupt. They've been on the phone with all these guys, Tim, for since Saturday and really all along, because we have, of course, this is in the context of this war that Israel is fighting against Hamas in Gaza, nearly 10 months now. Hezbollah in Lebanon has been bombing Israel in solidarity with the Palestinians in Gaza, and say that when that war, or if there were to be a ceasefire, they would stop fighting. That has been the goal of the U.S. and the French and others for a long time, and the Egyptians and the Qataris. So there are negotiations going on for some kind of ceasefire in Gaza, and that would, in theory, calm the guns as well in Lebanon. And then there would be an attempt for a longer-term deal. That is what the Americans want. It's not clear if it's gettable.
Hey, I'm just thinking, it's just off of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking before that joint session of Congress. Just remind us, I always feel like we go back there, but I guess being here from the United States, kind of want to understand on the ground, what is the support still for the military actions in Israel and also the military actions that are being led by the Prime Minister?
Oh, they're pretty intensive support. The Prime Minister, as we know, is facing political difficulties. He's been indicted for corruption. It is felt that his insistence on a judicial overhaul last year caused his Hamas to feel the country was weak enough for this kind of attack. So there's a lot of anger toward Netanyahu, but not about the war per se. There is a growing sense that he needs to do more to bring the remaining hostages home. But generally, Israelis feel that what happened on October 7th, 2023 is a sign that militias paid for and armed and trained by Iran want to destroy this country, and Israel needs to fight back intensively, both in the north and in the south. Don't forget there are 60 to 80,000 inhabitants of the north who've been out of their homes for nearly 10 months because of the rocket fire from Hezbollah, and people want to go back to their homes, and people want to send a message to Israel's enemies that says, we're willing to fight. We have no other home.
And there's still a willingness of the citizens in Israel who are and have been taking up arms to continue to do that.
Very much so. There is. Of course, there is fatigue, but there is a sense here that this is an existential set of conflicts, north and south, and with Iran fundamentally, and it mustn't be abandoned until victory of some nature has appeared.
As we always say, stay safe, Ethan. Thank you so much. Bloomberg News Israel Bureau Chief Ethan Bronner joining us in Tel Aviv. Well, we do want to get back to the markets. There's a lot on investors' minds, including, of course, what's going on geopolitically and, of course, what's going on in the Middle East. Interesting story right through about history being on the side of stock and bond bulls as Fed officials kicked off that two-day policy meeting today. Equities and bonds have posted weekly gains amid 6 of the 8 Fed meetings over the past year. This, according to an analysis, Tim, by Citigroup.
And yet the devil always in the details, with the key points to focus on in tomorrow's Fed decision. Back with us, we have Stephen Skanke, Chief Economic Advisor at the wealth advisor Keel Point. Steve, also a former U.S. Treasury and White House National Security Council staff member, serving during the Nixon, Ford, Carter, and Reagan administration. Steve joins us from Washington, D.C. Also here in the studio, Bloomberg Economics U.S. economist Stuart Paul. Stuart, good to have you here in the studio with us. I do want to start with you because the Fed is not expected to make any move tomorrow, but we do, or a lot of investors, I should say, expect to hear signals of perhaps a move come September. How do they thread that needle where they say, okay, we're not going to do anything in July, maybe we're not going to do anything, we're not going to do anything until September. How do you do that?
There are a few different ways that they could sort of gently modify the FOMC statement, the formal statement that comes out. For example, in the opening paragraph, there's a line, in recent months, there's been modest further progress towards the committee's 2% inflation target. Just stripping out the word modest, just there's been further progress would be one of those little gentle signs.
We said the devil was in the details, or one word.
That's right. They could be a bit more bold and say things that if the data evolves as the committee expects, it will soon be appropriate to begin cutting rates. That would be a much bolder, clearer call for a looming rate cut in September.
All right, I want to bring in Steve, and I'm just pulling it up on the Bloomberg. So September 18th is a long way off. I think about, Steve, we've made progress, a lot of progress in the past year when it comes to inflation. It seems to be settling down consistently. We continue to see U.S. economic growth. That's a good thing. We got some data today, consumer confidence rising on an improved outlook for the economy, job openings beating forecasts. It's this delicate balance. If you were still advising the White House, what would you be telling them about tomorrow's Fed decision?
Well, they just need to be patient and not seem anxious and not jump the gun on it. The Fed is navigating this very carefully and really very deftly. A week or so ago, the Fed chair, the New York Fed Bank president were all talking about the concern about what was happening in labor markets and really signaling that they're eager to start cutting rates, but they really need to see good inflation numbers. And then lo and behold, they get a reprieve because we get better than disinflation numbers with the PCE deflator down at 2.5% for the last year, and then better than expected second quarter economic growth at 2.8% annualized. Even though when you dig into it, it's not quite as good as it looks, but economy is slowing, but not in the tank. Inflation is coming down, and even the hard to squeeze housing or shelter component of the CPI and PCE deflator has started to give up. But it had been trending at 6.5% to 7% inflation, and now it's at 4%.
So, Steve, would you be telling, if you were advising the White House right now, say, hey, listen, guys, go take that vacation. We got plenty of time. Just cut to the chase. Would you say that?
I certainly would say that, because anything that they could say, Carol, is not going to be helpful to the Fed doing what it really wants to do, and that is cutting rates in September. Now, they can applaud positive economic growth. They can applaud inflation coming down. But I would tell the folks in the White House to say absolutely nothing about the Fed meeting and what the Fed is doing.
And they're independent, of course. Carol, remember, the Fed. The Fed is politically independent. You've heard. Stuart, economic data that you have an eye on at Bloomberg Economics as U.S. economist, where are you starting to see concerns? Do you think the Fed is acting too slowly on these concerns?
I don't. So you might want to rewind the clock a little bit and think back to Q4 of 2023 when the inflation data were so good and everybody was expecting a rate cut to come in March. And so things can change pretty quickly. We have had
it's like when you have a little sibling and you psych them and you pull something away, or like, that game.
Right.
Psych. Not happening.
Speaking from experience, Carol?
Yeah, there's a lot of siblings who do that.
The data in the economic landscape can change relatively quickly, and where we've seen the most change so far has been in the loosening of the labor market. It was just in the June summary of economic projections that the Fed was expecting to end the year with 4.1% unemployment, and we're already there. And I think that odds are favoring us triggering the SOM rule, that real-time recession indicator, in August.
Remind us what that rule is.
So if the 3-month moving average of the unemployment rate exceeds the 12-month minimum by more than 50 basis points, by half a percentage point, it's typically a good indicator that a recession has already begun, that you're in the early innings of a recession. So we're expecting, not only are we expecting to not end the year at 4.1% unemployment, which is where we are and which is where the Fed expects to end the year, we think that we're going to trigger that real-time recession indicator before the September meeting, which would warrant that cut in September.
Is there a chance it's triggered on Friday?
Very low probability that it's triggered on Friday. We'd basically need to get a move to 4.2 and a half, right? So 4.25% unemployment. So a bit out of range. Consensus is expecting a 4.1% unemployment rate. We think that it's more likely going to be the case that it's going to be triggered in the August jobs report, which comes just a few days before the September meeting.
Well, I kept thinking, we had that inverted yield curve for so long. I mean, do we get off scot-free, that we don't ultimately get a recession? I mean, Steve Skanke, if we get a recession, is it touch and go because we have enough growth, or could it be something more dramatic and problematic?
Well, the thing about it, Carol, that's a very good question, is that these things are never linear. It's not that it just sort of eases into recession. Something triggers it and pushes it, and Most likely it would be mild, just given everything else that's going on in the economy, but it isn't necessarily a mild recession. And so the Fed treads very carefully. And as Stuart said, this SOM rule, it's a statistical observation. It's not a syllogistic argument as to why it happens, but it has a good enough statistical basis that we really need to be careful about that and watch for it. The other thing is, and I agree with Stuart, it's very unlikely that we would see unemployment trigger up to what would be needed to trigger the SOM rule. But the household survey has been so quirky since COVID and the shutdown of the economy that and it digresses so much from the employer survey that we could actually end up with something that pushes unemployment to 4.2 or 4.2 and a half.
Yeah.
And then we've got this phenomenon of, well, what does it mean? And of course, markets would go crazy while they try to figure that out.
Got it.
Stuart, 10 seconds. 175,000 is the number that economists are expecting with the jobs report on Friday. Does it come in above or below that?
We're a smidge above, but we see the downside risk to 175. The effects of Hurricane Beryl are likely showing up in the data. We've already seen it affect the unemployment insurance claims data just 2 weeks ago in Texas.
All right. There we go.
I said 10 seconds. He did it.
Love when people listen. Thank you so much. Steve Skanke, Chief Economic Advisor at Keel Point, and of course, our own Stuart Hall, Bloomberg Economics U.S. economist. Coming up, well, we're going to continue to track the markets. We're also going to get to the latest from the campaign trail. This is Bloomberg.
In global leadership are on Bloomberg.
I envisage not only some kind of a bridge towards membership or language linked to the irreversibility of Ukraine's membership in NATO, but also some kind of a broader package of military material, of financial aid. The more we support Ukraine right now, the sooner the war will end.
Nobody covers the top global leaders like Bloomberg Television and Radio.
Bloomberg Power Players is back this September. As the top names in tennis take the court over in Queens, we're convening the best of the sports world right here in New York. We'll host some of the most influential voices in the business and identify what happens next for players and fans in this multi-billion-dollar global industry. Bloomberg Power Players, September 5th. Register now at BloombergLive.com/powerplayers.
The names that move markets are on Bloomberg.
We've seen story after story about companies delisting from the London Stock Exchange, listing in New York, listing in Europe. I want to turn that around. I want Britain to be the place of choice to make an IPO, to grow your business. That's why I welcome the reforms that the FCA put in place last week. It's also why I'm determined to change our pension system so we can keep more businesses here in Britain.
Bloomberg. Context changes everything. It's It's the world's second largest economy with a growing influence in global affairs. But geopolitical uncertainties, deflationary pressures, and questions about foreign investment linger. Bloomberg, The China Show, brings you the unmatched expertise you need to keep track of breaking news, in-depth market analysis, and the most influential newsmakers in and around China. Bloomberg, The China Show. Weekdays at 9 a.m. Hong Kong time, right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The Dow holding on to a gain of 207 points, now up by 0.5%. Much of the market, though, being hit by a sell-off in the world's largest tech companies. We got the S&P down 22, a drop right now of 0.4%. NASDAQ down 181, lower by 1%. The NASDAQ 100 index down 1.1%. But the Russell 2000 index of small-cap shares is up 0.3%. 10-year 4.14%, the 2-year 4.35%. Gold up 1%, 24.06 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.4%, 74.76 a barrel. CrowdStrike Holdings shares falling to their lowest since December, following a report that Delta Airlines has hired a prominent attorney following a technology outage that led the carrier to cancel thousands of flights. Delta shares, they're up 1.1%. Shares of CrowdStrike, though, down now by 10.8%. Coming up after the close of trading, we hear from Microsoft and Advanced Micro Devices. Right now, we've got Microsoft down 1.3%. Meta Platforms reports tomorrow, down 0.4%. Apple on Thursday up 0.1%. Also Thursday, Amazon down now by 0.9%. Again, recapping, stocks lower. S&P down 25, down 0.5. 10-year yield 4.13%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. Well, Vice President Kamala Harris is kicking off a push to compete against Republican Donald Trump in a wider swath of battleground states with a rally today in Atlanta. Harris's event in Georgia's largest city is her first major effort to put a larger group of states back into play since launching her campaign back on July 21st.
Meantime, the presidential race is on, the money race, that is. Among our most read on the Bloomberg terminal today is an exclusive about hedge fund billionaire Ken Griffin, who's spending tens of millions of dollars to back Republican primary candidates across the U.S. The story reported by Bloomberg News national reporter Mike Smith and Bill Allison, Bloomberg News campaign finance reporter. Mike joins us from Miami. Bill in our D.C. bureau. Mike, I do want to start with you. How would you characterize the type of candidate that Griffin is giving to right now? Because there's a lot of nuance here.
Yeah, there is a lot of nuance, and it's not entirely clear exactly what he's looking for, but in general, it's sort of old school pro-business conservative values that he is backing. For example, national defense. And one of the main things he is promoting is sort of helping the American dream, which is obviously a very broad description, but that's how he describes it.
Does that backing, Mike, include Donald Trump at this point?
Well, so far, no. As far as we can see in the most recent filings in terms of money, he's yet to give money to Donald Trump. He hasn't ever given money to Donald Trump that we know of. And he's quite guarded in saying whether he's going to back Trump or not. He's certainly a Republican. He gives to Republican causes and candidates, but Trump is yet to be seen.
So, Bill, let's go through the money. What do we know about Ken Griffin and his donations to the GOP going back the last decade or so? What has he typically supported? How much has he given up? And where does it go? And what is he doing today?
Really, since 2016, he's focused on Congress, both the Senate and the House. He's given, I think, $248 million since 2015, which is an awful lot of money, about $250 million. And he's focused largely on super PACs that, again, elect members of Congress. And in the last couple of cycles, he's really looked at early money and having an influence on primaries, like who gets chosen to get elected to Congress. Like he'll look at safe Republican districts, he'll put a lot of money in behind what he views as a superior candidate and try to get that person into Congress. And so far this cycle, he's put more than $75 million into political committees at the federal level.
Mike, how successful has he been over the last decade? Because it seems like he hasn't always bet on the right horse, so to speak. He supported the opponent to J.D. Vance in his Ohio Senate race who J.D. Vance ended up beating. He's thinking about supporting somebody who could challenge Matt Gaetz. He has supported Nikki Haley in the past, Kevin McCarthy in the past as well. How successful has he been?
Yeah, I mean, that's an elusive thing to answer, but we can say that this cycle, he's gotten behind 60 different candidates in congressional races, and they've won about 2/3 of those, or a little bit more. So it's not a bad record. He has won a lot, but he's also lost some, and a lot of his money has gone into losing races, and a lot has gone into winning races.
And I do wonder too, Bill, we often kid, but it's very true. Money talks, right? And money gets attention. How influential has he been really in kind of shaping what's going on in the Republican Party? We talk so much about it being, Donald Trump's party right now. But how much has he really been influential over the GOP overall?
Well, the Republican operatives that we talk to, the people who run super PACs, the people who recruit candidates, the people who really kind of do that nuts and bolts work of running the party, say that he's fundamental to their success. He's very influential. He's very important. If you have an idea for a super PAC, you want to elect veterans, you want to elect women with business experience. There's a whole broad range of folks who do different kinds of super PACs. He's somebody who's definitely going to be on your list to try to get, at least to his advisors, to make your pitch, to say this is what my plan is, this is what I'd like to do. And, if he decides to fund you, you have a good chance of also drawing money from other donors.
Bill, somebody might read a story like this and come away with a really cynical view that, politicians can be, I'm not going to say they can be bought, but certainly people with power are able to donate a lot of money to super PACs that go around traditional campaign finance. Just give us some context as to how something like this is legal and how super PACs are able to operate in this world when certain individuals are only allowed to give a relatively small amount of money to individual candidates.
Boy, there's a famous saying in politics that, there are three important things in politics: money, and I forget what the other two are. And this has been kind of consistent throughout history. Super PACs are legal because of basically the First Amendment. The Supreme Court held that, if you're speaking independently, i.e. not donating to a politician, but donating to a group that tries to elect politicians, that's First Amendment protected activity. And that, in something called the Citizens United case, gave us these creatures, or these super PACs. And it is fairly important in U.S. politics that you be able to have. There's three different kinds of donors. There's small dollar donors, which are very important, but you need millions and millions of them to add up to a lot of money. And then you have a handful of people. There's the folks in the middle, and you have the handful of people at the top who can, with one check, fund, a huge ad buys. We've seen already in this campaign an investor named Timothy Mellon who put $50 million into a super PAC backing Donald Trump. I mean, it's we've done stories that Elon Musk is thinking of putting $45 million into a super PAC each month to help Donald Trump with his ground game. So obviously, it's hugely important, and it's perfectly legal.
Mike, I think about Ken Griffin, right? He's been in Florida, maybe a couple of years, or it's been a couple of years since he announced moving down there. He's become very influential, certainly on the state. But I do think about, as you guys are laying out the causes that are of importance to him, he doesn't necessarily buy into the populism, does he, that Donald Trump seems to espouse along with J.D. Vance?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. He stresses that, and the people that are close to him stress that what he's looking for is candidates who are conservative, Republican, but also candidates that can governance. He likes to use that word a lot in a lot of things that he does in terms of giving. And I think he strives, or he says he strives to apply that to the candidates and the politicians that he decides to back. And he's quite loyal. He will stick with a politician that he believes in or feels like is worth backing.
So seeing NYMEX natural gas,
and that seems to be a key driver of what he does. He wants.
Excuse me. So we're seeing NYMEX natural gas September futures settle at $2.12. The diesel August futures at $2.34. Gasoline August futures at $2.39.
And he shies away from.
And NYMEX WTI crude September futures settle at $74.73 a barrel, which is down $1.08 or 1.42% on the session.
Affairs head Kason Carter.
Well, he's very key to this process. He wouldn't talk to us for this story, but he plays a pivotal role in helping Ken Griffin decide where to put his money, not just in political giving, but also in philanthropy, for example. So he's a pivotal sort of advisor in that realm.
Hey, Bill, when you look at the money that's been drummed up in this race so far, I think about, Kamala Harris, the money that she's raised since she has essentially taken over the mantle from Joe Biden. I think about, we just talked about Elon Musk. We're talking about Ken Griffin. It's a lot of money. I'm just curious, is this turning out to be one of the more expensive campaigns or races?
It's like it's going to be. I mean, it's, every presidential record sort of sets a record, or presidential election sets a record because, contribution limits go up, things get more expensive, super PACs are, play a bigger role. There was some thought that maybe the 2020 election, because of COVID, there would be less spending. It turned out there was more spending than ever. So I think we'll see more spending, and it's in part because, as Ken Griffin said or told us in the article, it's there's a lot at stake in this election. It's an important time for the country, and all the money is coming out.
Bill, just 20 seconds left. Any whispers of campaign finance reform around the halls of Washington, D.C. these days?
It's, there are people who still plug away at it. It is not really a priority for Congress or this administration, and it hasn't been for years and years. I mean, the closest thing we have is some bills to disclose dark money, but, they get stuck in the Senate or the House and don't really go anywhere.
All right, well, if you weren't depressed enough, we're going to have some talk of climate change coming up in just a moment to keep the mood going. Bloomberg News national reporter Mike Smith and Bill Allison, Bloomberg News campaign finance reporter. This is a Bloomberg exclusive and among our most read on the Bloomberg terminal.
Still to come, we talk climate change on the other side. First up, though, a check on the latest world and national news with Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Tim. Israel's military struck Beirut, aiming at a Hezbollah commander in response to a rocket attack in the Golan Heights that killed 12 people on Saturday. Natasha Hall is a senior fellow with the Middle East program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She says this was expected.
I was speaking to diplomats just a bit earlier than this, and there had been some evacuation of the Dahia, or this suburban area of Beirut that is also a Hezbollah stronghold. So many people in the area knew that this might be the targeted area and had been evacuating for some time. That said, we should still be aware of the civilian casualties that might be at play, because this is a neighborhood after all.
Natasha Hall speaking with Bloomberg's Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines. A top U.S. official said a communications breakdown between the Secret Service and local police was a major security failure surrounding the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Ronald Rowe is the acting head of the embattled Secret Service. He told senators his agency was ultimately responsible, but it was communication problems with local law enforcement that prevented his agents from doing their job. And we are watching the medal count in Paris. The women's gymnastics team with Simone Biles just won the gold. U.S. has a total of 22 medals. Japan has the most gold at 7. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. This is Bloomberg.
why does this business model work? Because it's virgin space. It's never been done before, and it'll never be done again. When you step back and you look at something that's been golf through institutions has been the way it has been for 53 years without change. In 1993, I stepped back and said, okay, this is not right. It's doing the same old Groundhog Day. Everything's the same. Players are a pass-through entity. They're not getting any equity built in their day. Once they're done playing, they're out. I thought, that's just not right. When you have to build a sustainable model, you need to have these players, these famous, the world best, the best of the best. You need to give them equity into the future. You need to give them a vision of where they need to go and how they're going to get there.
It's the countdown to the market open as we bring you the first trades across Europe.
We'll debate the most important stories and what will drive the big investment decisions throughout the morning. I'm Guy Johnson.
I'm Kriti Gupta.
And I'm Anna Edwards. Join us every weekday morning for the opening trade, live at 7 a.m. here in London.
Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
What legacy I would love to leave is to make sure that in my village I have infrastructure. So long when I'm gone, things are still working, then I have done my job. And if some people get inspired through my work and then try to engage themselves for their community and create something that is inspiring for everyone, I will be happy.
What's the best piece of advice you would give to someone young who wants to make a difference actually in this world? In architecture or with something else?
Wow, I'm not the right one to just do that.
I think you are.
Yeah, but with the pressure you have, and then you try to be the good one, the fancy guy, the intellectual one, I have no advice then to believe in yourself and really work hard. You know, when I started, no one would have imagined that I will be able to see my name connected with Aga Khan or Pritzker or sitting at Bloomberg to talk about sustainability, about future of sales. No, myself 5 years ago, if you told me that, I will say no. I will never imagine. So I will encourage everyone to believe in what you're doing and not try to run after the newest of the newest. Just be consistent. Just work on things that matters for you. Really, at the long term, it pays.
Or other authorities.
Could face bigger challenges.
Lessons next. It was going to keep Rain World Cup. This is a three.
As the economic picture
Covering the intersections of Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and beyond.
Asia is at the forefront of some of the world's biggest stories. I'm Chevrian in Tokyo.
And I'm Heidi Stroud-Watts here in Sydney where the trading day begins. We're here in the center of all the action to get you set up with the numbers, news and knowledge you need for the day ahead.
The demand is indeed recovering.
We've been waiting for this moment.
The opportunity of a century.
Join us on Bloomberg The Asia Trade. Weekdays only on Bloomberg TV. Context changes everything.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Tech stocks selling off, bonds and gold climbing as traders rush for safety amid geopolitical risks. The S&P right now is down 26 points to 5437, a drop now of 0.5%. Dow Industrials holding on to a gain of 163 points, up by about 0.4%. The Dow has been higher all day. We've got NASDAQ, though, down 188 points now, a drop of 1.1%. The NASDAQ 100 500 index also lower by 1.1%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares little changed, higher now by just under 0.2%. 10-year 4.14%, the 2-year 4.35%. Spot gold up 0.9%, 24.05 the ounce, while West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 1.2%, 74.93 per barrel of WTI. All eyes will be on Microsoft after the close of trading, the first of 4 mega-cap tech names reporting this week. Microsoft ahead of earnings down 1.5%. Meta Platforms reports tomorrow down 0.4%. Apple on Thursday, little change right now.
Brent crude futures settle at $78.63 a barrel, which is down $1.15 or 1.44%.
Mixed with the S&P 500 index down 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, you know this, the Olympics are underway. Yay. Stop sending me headlines because I really want to find out the results later when I go home. But
you also shouldn't listen then to, Amy Morris, who gives us some updates.
Love you, Amy, but
she tells us.
I don't want to know.
Okay. Sorry, Carol.
All right, meantime, not so great, though. Paris is forecast to reach 100 degrees Fahrenheit today. That's the hottest since 2022. And tonight expected to bring very little relief to the Olympic City. And then one more thing to kind of warm up your heart, note our sarcasm. Yesterday was the hottest day, Tim, in recorded history.
Bloomberg opinion editor Mark Gongloff wrote last week that it is only going to get worse. I was not prepared for that. We're not prepared for that. Mark covers climate change, something that I think he would argue we're not prepared for. Generally and regularly freaks us out, although he does try to leave us with hope too. Mark joins us here in the studio. So it's hot in Paris, it's hot in London, a yellow heat health alert, elevated risk for people over 65. That's in place for much of England until Friday. In Greece, there were 54 wildfires in the 24 hours to 6:30 p.m. yesterday. Fires in Canada. Northern California is burning. Drought in Africa after just a few months ago dealing with deadly floods. And we're out of time for you to tell us why.
Yeah, that sums it up.
Happy Tuesday, everybody.
Glad to be here.
You okay?
Yeah.
Everything okay?
Yeah, that's about it.
Okay. What's good?
What's good? Well, I guess it's interesting. The Olympic thing comes at a time when they built the Olympic Village to not use air conditioning, which caused a lot of controversy at the time. And in fact, the U.S. and some other teams brought their own air conditioning. They're like, we're not going to do this. So it's going to be a real test tonight because it's going to be real hot today, but it's going to still be hot at night. And that's kind of the worst thing is when you can't cool off at night. Fortunately, it is the good news, I guess, is it is going to kind of cool down tomorrow in Paris. It's going to be like 90, which is still pretty hot. But you will get
Bring
a break.
out the coats.
I know. You will get a break in the weather, but then you'll also have a bunch of rain, which is going to make the Seine impossible to swim in for another few days.
Which they already had to postpone.
The triathlon, yeah.
Having said that, my daughter spent last summer in Paris and working, and she's like, nobody has air conditioning because they never have had air conditioning. I grew up, there was like a week where mom and dad were like, let's put on the air conditioning. Northern New Jersey, like it wasn't hot. You can't live without air conditioning now, it feels like. And not everybody has it.
Right. And especially in cooler places. You talk about New Jersey, where I live now. I used to visit New Jersey all the time. I grew up in South Carolina where it was constantly like the surface of the sun. And I would go to New Jersey to visit my grandmother and be like, oh, this is pleasant. It's cool at night. It's beautiful. It's not like that anymore. It's kind of like South Carolina now. I mean, the planet has heated up. Parts of the country have heated up more than others. And that's what we're starting to experience. And so places that like Seattle or places like that don't have a lot of air conditioning that aren't used to the heat, if they get a big heat wave like we saw a few years ago, then those people really suffer a lot. And so that's one of the risks we face. That's one of the reasons we're not totally prepared for what's coming to us.
I think what's interesting is you two are sharing anecdotes of a period of time that was not very long ago.
Right.
And I wonder what and we've seen a difference in a very short period of time. What does that portend for the next 10, 20, 30 years, Mark, if we don't get this under control? Well, and by we, I mean the collective human.
Right, the collective we. I guess the good news is that we do still have some control over this. There is some heat baked into it. We've heated up about 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial averages. Kind of feels like a meaningless number, but all the stuff that you're seeing now, these massive wildfires that are getting so hot that they create like fire nados and create their own weather systems. They create lightning and stuff because they're burning so hot. That kind of stuff is coming after just 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming on average of the planet. If we don't get our act together, we're looking at maybe 3 or 4 degrees Celsius of warming. If we do get our act together, maybe we can limit it to 1.5 or 2, and that's the best case scenario. So that with this is kind of the new-ish normal, and we will still have some more of this sort of adjustment to deal with. But we can do that but we have to get our act together fairly quickly.
What do you say to those people that, all right, the climate's always changing, and we've gone through hot periods thousands of years ago, and look, here we are, it's so lovely.
Well, you talked about the record, the hottest day, as far as we know, and you know, scientists have gone to the bottom of lakes and scraped up debris down there to figure out what the temperature was, because there weren't thermometers around 125,000 years ago. We had other problems.
We could build pyramids, but we couldn't build them. All right, we'll discuss that later.
Yeah, anything. We don't have records,
yeah.
But they've been able to dig it up, and they can see that it's the hottest it's been in 125,000 years, at least. The climate is always changing, but what's happened lately is we've sort of speed run heating that usually takes thousands of years. You know, you'll have 100,000 years going into an ice age, 100,000 years coming out, and we've been in like 6,000 years of a very nice, pleasant temperature in which civilization has grown. We've, you know, created antibiotics and Stanley Cups and everything. We've had like a great civilization, but now the heat is so much that we're starting to push the limits of survivability, and we're going to have to learn to adapt to that.
So you're saying because the ramp up in heat has happened in a shorter period of time, it's much more serious.
Exactly. It's raising 1.5 degrees Celsius would ordinarily take thousands of years, and the rest of that, if we get to 3 or 4, that's only going to take another decade or 2, or maybe 5. But if it takes 5 decades, again, compared to geologic time, that's the blink of an eye. And that is hard for us and for the rest of the planet to adjust to.
I think one thing that might be a challenge for people to think about is the way that lawmakers don't necessarily think about the long term. I think critics would say. You can think about it from a transportation perspective. I mean, you and I have talked a lot about the challenges getting between New York and New Jersey. And, you know, had lawmakers 30, 40 years ago thought about this, then there would be more tunnels for less money between New Jersey and New York.
Yeah.
But that type of political long-term thinking is very difficult for politicians to do.
Yeah.
Infrastructure-wise, what about when it comes to climate resilience?
It's the same thing, and it's a little bit better because you can see, it's in your face, the things that you need to do. And so say with wildfires, for example, we know the sort of things we need to do. California has really ramped up its response capabilities. It's started working on building fire breaks and that sort of thing. But we are still rebuilding houses in wildfire-prone areas. We're subsidizing the rebuilding of houses in wildfire-prone areas, in flood-prone areas. We still have not come to grips with the fact that we need to move out of these places because people don't want to pay more for insurance, and politicians don't want to force people to pay more for insurance because you lose elections. You talk about that tunnel to New Jersey. We did think about that 20 years ago, but we decided not to do it because Chris Christie wanted to not raise gas taxes before an election, and so we didn't get that tunnel then. Now we got to wait till 2035 to get the new tunnel.
The upbeat moment that you need to leave us with?
Yeah, we have a minute left.
Yeah, I've got a minute to do the upbeat stuff. I mean, you know, you talk about the
I need to be picked up off the floor, please.
Okay, I will, or I'll try. You know, the upbeat thing is that, yes, it is hard to get people to see around those corners, but we have started to see that. I mean, you know, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the biggest climate bill we've ever seen. You know, people in the Republican Party are starting to think about this, too. They know that they need to come to grips with it. The young people in their party and throughout this country are worrying about this more. There was an Alliance thing, where a survey that Alliance did, where they asked its clients by generation, you know, if they were worried about their finances being impacted by climate change. And I think only 32% of baby boomers said yes, but 70% of millennials said yes. And you can see that shifting up by generation. And so, you know,
our
the
kids
children
are hopefully going to save us, right?
So, yeah.
All right. It's a little upbeat. We'll take it. Mark Ungloff, thank you always. Bloomberg Opinion Editor Mark Ungloff joining us. Coming up, we're going to get into a buy one, get one deal that isn't quite maybe necessarily working out like it's supposed to.
Yeah, we'll give you the details right after this. This is Bloomberg.
First of all, global trade, which had adverse consequences that we're learning about to this day, still unleashed an enormous amount of gain for humanity. And with the rise of global trade became the rise of information sharing around the world, which rapidly accelerated the trajectory of mankind. I mean, of note, the Chinese, for example, are leaders in solar. They're leaders in EVs. They're leaders in a number of emerging technologies. In a world which is more splintered, we'll see the gains that the Chinese have achieved in these important areas not shared by the Western countries. And conversely, the United States is a clear leader in AI, along with a number of the European countries. And those gains will not be shared with China and the countries in its sphere of influence. So it's a very clear-cut loss for all of humanity when we have the severing of ties between our countries.
On a practical level, is it getting harder to manage the risks you face?
I think that one has to be aware that there are more tail risks that are harder to ultimately manage.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the opening trade.
This is Bloomberg Technology.
This is the Asia Trade.
You're watching the close.
Welcome to Balance of Power.
This is Bloomberg. Bloomberg loves earnings.
I know it's like your Super Bowl, right?
I can't wait. It's like opening presents in the morning.
All right, it will be exciting.
Nobody covers earnings like Bloomberg. Now, your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. A year after Warren Buffett called his multi-billion-dollar bet on Bank of America an investment worth keeping, he is selling it down. Berkshire Hathaway disclosed its third disposal of its shares this month, pairing its massive, profitable bet on the lender by a total of more than $3 billion. Now, according to a regulatory filing, the conglomerate, which has started building an investment in the bank in 2011 and has long reigned as the top shareholder, sold $767 million of the stock from July 25th to July 29th. That and prior sales this month reduced Berkshire's stake by a total of 6.9%. Shares of Bank of America, they're down today by 0.5%. Berkshire Hathaway shares, the Class A stock, up by 0.3%. Procter & Gamble reported quarterly sales that missed analyst projections as the maker of Pampers diapers and Tide detergents slows its pace of price increases. Procter & Gamble shares today, they are tumbling by 5.7%. Sprouts Farmers Market surging today after the natural and organic food retailer boosted its full-year projections for comparable sales and profit. B of A upgraded the stock with a $100 price target. Wells Fargo also upgraded the stock with a $90 price target. Shares of Sprouts today, they are advancing up by 13.8%. JetBlue Airways is going to cut $3 billion in capital spending through 2029 and plans other measures to boost pre-tax income by as much as $900 million, all part of a sweeping plan by its new CEO to restructure operations. JetBlue right now up by 10.4%. And those are our top company stories at this hour. I'm Charlie Pellet, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. Let's get a check on the latest world and national news. We got Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Tim. Israel's military struck Beirut, aiming at a Hezbollah commander in response to a rocket attack from Saturday in the Golan Heights that killed 12 people. Israel blames the Lebanon-based militant group for the weekend attack. Natasha Hall is a senior fellow with the Middle East program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and says the U.S. is working to make sure a wider conflict doesn't break out.
Joe Biden and others within the administration are working very, very hard not to see that regional escalation, because that would essentially mean a two-front war for Israel as well.
Natasha Hall speaking with Bloomberg's Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines. Venezuela's government is engaging in a full crackdown on any resistance to President Nicolas Maduro's self-declared victory, announcing 749 arrests and detaining prominent opposition figure Freddy Supilano. The arrests followed Maduro's live stream, which was broadcast to X last night, in which he said protesters would be severely prosecuted after thousands of Venezuelans took to the streets of Caracas, decrying what they say is a fraudulent win. And we're watching the medal count in Paris. Carol, close your ears. The women's gymnastics team with Simone Biles won the gold. The U.S. has a total of 22 medals now. France has 17. China has 14. And Japan has the most gold medals at 7. Global news 24 hours a day whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. Now back to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stennis.
I never close my ears. I never close my ears when Amy is talking. We don't have, Carol, we don't have rights to that music. You can't sing that.
I don't want to know. I still love you, Amy. I just don't want to know.
Well, you better check out for the next couple of weeks because we're going to get the updates from.
I love like going through like the competition. You don't know if they're going to win, and you're like cheering, and then.
Well, wait till 2028 when they're in Los Angeles, and then you're good.
Darn it.
The time zone thing won't be an issue for you.
Darn it.
Okay.
Okay. Can we talk about Starbucks?
Yeah, let's talk about Starbucks. I don't know if you've been trying to order any of your Well, first of all, Starbucks is reporting after the bell. I don't know if you've tried to order any.
Not today.
Cafe.
Not
any
today.
Coffee. Yeah.
I go upstairs to 6.
Okay, not today. You haven't tried.
No.
But an outage for hours disabled mobile ordering, and it was actually connected to issues affecting Microsoft's Azure cloud service. This, according to a person familiar with the matter who wasn't authorized to speak publicly. You have everything coming together in this story.
It's like
you have
look at that
most
that Venn diagram, right?
and 2 companies that are reporting earnings after the bell today.
Listen, I can't wait then for the Starbucks call because there's so much then to talk about if you think about it. Listen, the chain had planned a basically buy one get one free deal from noon to 6 p.m. today, according to a promotional email that was sent to rewards members. Starbucks has been offering discounts more frequently. They're trying to spark demand. There was a sharp pullback in orders earlier this year. And yet, lo and behold, when users tried to use the app to do it, it just kind of wasn't working today.
Yeah, attempts at mobile ordering by users in Chicago, New York, Tampa, Boston, Atlanta, and Ottawa showed a system error Tuesday morning. Baristas at locations in New York and Chicago said as of 11:30 that they hadn't been notified of the cause.
Yeah, earlier today, some customers were briefly unable to access the mobile order and pay feature in the Starbucks app due to a third-party system outage, the company said, declining to elaborate.
Do you think we'll hear anything about it on the call?
I certainly would ask if I was an analyst.
Microsoft
yeah.
today?
Oh, or Microsoft. See, again,
then maybe, yeah, everything comes together. It's all about earnings.
It's almost like perfect, right?
You can't get a coffee,
can't
it's
make
a tech
this stuff
issue.
up. Exactly, exactly. Listen, we'll find out. I mean, that was a big thing, right? And Microsoft's still dealing with it, right?
Yeah.
Lots of questions about it. We will have Microsoft earnings after the close. We will have Starbucks earnings after the close. We've got a lot more. We've got Electronic Arts. We've got Caesars. We've got Mondelez, Pinterest, Live Nation.
Match Group, AMD. The list goes on. We'll be covering those for you on Bloomberg Business Week. If you're sticking around on TV, the close starts now. If you're hanging with us on radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals, we got a great program. We talk NVIDIA and earnings. This is Bloomberg.
The countdown is on. Everything you need to get the edge at the end of the market day. This is the close.
A big day for big tech as the NASDAQ tumbles toward correction. Live from Studio 2 here at Bloomberg headquarters in New York, I'm Romaine Bostic, and you cannot make me laugh at the start of the show like that.
I didn't. You made me laugh. Okay, I spilled a big drink on the set right before the show. That's what's happening. It kicks us off very well for earnings season, if this bodes well here. You got the S&P down by about 0.6%, right around the lows of the session, but we're also really looking towards earnings. We've got in tech getting hit quite hard as well. Now let's take a look at some other asset classes here because they may be moving on different things. So crude getting hit yet again near a 7-month low. Those China worries through earnings or through GDP reads like over in Germany continue to filter through the market. 2-year yield, though, getting a bid as geopolitical risk over in Israel and Lebanon continues to heat up as well as dollar yen. The yen getting a little bit of outperformance here as the BOJ is just hours away now, Romaine. Will they finally hike those rates?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a big question of the day, but the big question of the moment right now revolves around big tech, with the NASDAQ 100 sell-off entering new depths. Now down 9%. from its record high back on July 10th, the precipice of correction territory. It flirted with it earlier in the session, and whether that index actually tips over the edge, likely to be determined over the next 72 hours. Microsoft earnings tonight, a big Fed meeting on Wednesday, Apple and Amazon reporting on Thursday. Now, we should point out that traders have really become increasingly concerned that tech companies aren't yet seeing returns from all those big investments they've been making in artificial intelligence. Alphabet's sell-off last week indicative of that, really raising the bar for Microsoft, which for a stock trading at 32 times projected profits, needs to show that its AI-related spending growth is translating into sales growth as well. Kate Moore at BlackRock, cautious, but still seeing opportunity.
We've been cutting tech a little bit since the kind of the peak we had in the mid-late spring, but we still feel convicted that this is going to be the most powerful theme over the next couple years.
A conversation there about tech, a conversation up ahead also about the airline sector. JetBlue beating Wall Street expectations in its latest earnings report. Budget carrier Spirit considering ways to go premium, and plane maker Airbus trying to solve its supply chain issues. A conversation ahead with Guillaume Faury, the CEO of Airbus. But let's circle back, Alex, to the big story of the day, certainly once we get to those closing bells, and that is Microsoft and big tech.
That is Microsoft. Let's get to the highlight here, which is what you were just talking about in terms of CapEx. This is a great chart showing the quarterly CapEx of Microsoft. And here we have it for the first quarter coming in at around $11 billion. Now, the estimates for this quarter could be as much as $13.3 billion. Now, for some extent, investors were happy to see that CapEx because the more you invest, the more the monetization and the return you'll get on that investment. Now their questions are you spending too much and not being able to monetize those AI offerings at the same time? And that gap and how long that gap lasts, now really the question, Romain, because no one wants to be the first hyperscaler to now spend less on AI.
Absolutely, and that is the question that we do want to pose to our guests today, including Michael Turin, who's joining us to kick us off to the close here on this Tuesday afternoon. He's Managing Director and Software Analyst over at Wells Fargo. Microsoft coming out tonight. You know, Michael, everyone's going to be focused really on Azure and really on AI. What's most important to you later tonight?
Yeah, look, if you're spilling drinks, you're as nervous as tech investors starting the soft earnings cycle here. Definitely all focus on Azure and AI as a starting point. I think Microsoft surprised to the upside, guiding for 28%. Azure growth putting up a strong 31% on fiscal Q3. Commentary for stabilization of growth has investors expecting that growth number can remain in the 30s, both for the printed fiscal Q4 and guidance that's issued for fiscal Q1. And I think the expectation is that the AI contribution at least ticks up a bit from the 700 basis points we saw last quarter. The good news for Microsoft is they are one of the only companies in software that is quantifying AI contribution, and I think that was intentional, just given the uptick in CapEx that we're seeing. But obviously, you're right. The primary focus is Azure and AI, followed up by margins and CapEx and Office Copilot, if I had to put a third in there.
Well, let's talk about the CapEx side, because this seems to be where we're seeing a lot of the hand-wringing, if not by analysts, certainly by the media, our present company included. And I do wonder if maybe we're making too much of that, because there is this discussion, in all seriousness, Michael, the idea here that the CapEx is high, but at least for companies like the Microsofts and Apples, we're talking about just cash cows here. They have the cash to burn if they want to burn it. Are investors going to be comfortable with that if that cash burn continues?
Yeah, I mean, we've said AI exuberance is leading to AI impatience now, and I can certainly understand why. But you're right, for Microsoft, this is a $2 trillion company. Certainly the amount of CapEx being thrown into this is non-trivial, but they also have Azure. So I think Microsoft has the benefit of some diversification where they can spin up data center capacity and basically turn it where the market is heading. Right now, Microsoft has a lead in AI. This is the first tech lead Microsoft has had in a major tech shift in quite some time. Recall Azure was a fast follower alongside AWS. So Microsoft has no intentions of slowing down here as far as we can tell. And I would agree that even though our number for CapEx for fiscal 25 is $67 billion, and every investor we speak with says that's too low, likely not much slowing down. And the benefit for Microsoft is Azure demand remains quite robust. And so building data center capacity is something that's just well aligned with the broader cloud aspirations of the company.
Michael, then to dumb it down for me, if we wind up seeing a sell-off on higher CapEx spend like we did with Google, for example, is that a buy the dip for you then?
It is. The parallel I draw, and again, it's a software-centric lens, is what happened with cloud. So when cloud started and Amazon broke out their financials with AWS, every software investor said, oh my gosh, what is that? And then every software company in the infrastructure layer had a really hard time finding a multiple because the view was no companies on the infrastructure layer would exist. And that was a little short-sighted. And it took some time for the multi-cloud thesis to play out. But I think most investors agree that this generative AI shift is real. And the question is just how long will the shift take? I think most software companies we cover are saying we have to get the foundational technology right. So that's going to take some time, and it's more likely into 2025 where we start to see material contribution. But there's a lot of innovation and a lot of building coming, and I am still of the mindset as well that this is something that Microsoft is better suited to stay in front of, and investors should be willing to stay the course here also.
We just got word that the Microsoft Azure, I should say, sees services now fully mitigated by about 8:30. But that really puts it in a tough spot because this has been a really tough day for Microsoft when it's had all these issues with its 360 as well as the Azure cloud, and then you had the CrowdStrike issue a couple weeks ago. I mean, what do you think? What are your questions going to be on this on the Microsoft call?
Yeah, definitely tied to some of what we're talking about, the confidence and the durability of growth. The demand signals they're seeing in AI are quite important. One thing they put out last quarter was a suggestion that the AI contribution metric could have been even stronger, but they were somewhat supply constrained because everyone's fighting for GPU capacity. So understanding that supply-demand relationship on the AI side is quite important. Beyond that, we're focused on Copilot. Both Security Copilot and Microsoft 365 Copilot have the potential to become meaningful product cycles alongside all of the other innovative product categories that Microsoft is focused on. So those alongside security, right? There are questions we're getting around, is the incident that happened a few weeks ago something that Microsoft could actually lean into and create the case for leveraging more Microsoft first-party security solutions instead of third-party solutions, because it seems like it's more the upgrade cycle, the maintenance that's tied to maintaining multiple systems that was at fault here, not Microsoft specific.
All right, Michael, going to have to leave it there. Always great to catch up with you. A busy day, or actually a busy few days ahead for you. Michael Turn, Managing Director and Software Analyst at Wells Fargo. A closer look at Microsoft coming up after the bell. In between that here, right here on the show, a conversation with the CEO of Airbus. Going to be joining the big program with his outlook on the pace of manufacturing as aircraft demand continues to take off.
Plus, shares of Novavax plunging as JP Morgan delivers a downgrade and a street low price target on the stock. We're going to dig into the call that's rocking the stock.
And down in Washington, the Fed beginning its two-day meeting, and a lot of investors reversing their stance on when rate cuts just might happen. Goldman CEO David Solomon reportedly now seeing up to 2 rate cuts in 2024. We break down all the market expectations ahead of Decision Day tomorrow. All that and more coming up in a bit right here on The Close on Bloomberg.
Fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield every Friday right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything. Bloomberg covers the world with unmatched reach and resources. From more than 120 countries, the moment news breaks, 24 hours a day. Bloomberg. Context changes everything. Lots happening on Wall Street.
I couldn't have been more wrong.
It's going to stay volatile for a while longer.
It's a bifurcated market.
Need to catch up?
This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston.
We've got the information and insight.
Year over year, you could start to see some cracks.
It might be overhyped short term, but it's underhyped long term.
From businesses most influential and instrumental.
A lot of the doom and gloom has been somewhat overblown.
If you're not living near the edge, you're taking up too much space.
Bloomberg Wall Street Week, live Friday with replays all weekend on Bloomberg Television and Radio. It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. Bloomberg ETF IQ, Monday on Bloomberg. Bloomberg Surveillance covers the latest in global markets and the political events that influence your world. Join Jonathan Farrell, Lisa Abramowitz, and Anne-Marie Hordern only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Airbus reporting earnings today, beating estimates with U.S. ADRs up almost 4%. Its commercial and helicopter divisions drove that beat despite higher costs in its space unit, which racked up almost $1 billion in charges in the first half. Joining us now for more on this is Guillaume Faury, CEO of Airbus. Guillaume, thank you so much. I know it's quite late where you are, so thank you for joining us. I just want to start on the space issue and get to that root cause. You mentioned one entrant in the marketplace really messed things up. Can you give me more color onto what that is?
So we have programs which are under long-term estimate at completions. And we have underestimated the risk that we have embarked when we signed the contract or when we launched the program.
According to an Ipsos poll, registered voters prefer Trump's plans on the economy, immigration and crime. Harris leads on healthcare, though, again, according to this Ipsos poll.
Challenges, and that's where we are in space. So we have launched a turnaround of the programs. We are focusing on those programs, but also turning around the business itself. So that's an important activity for me this year and for my team to focus on the recovery of space and against the backdrop of a challenging business environment in space.
So no color into what that new entrant is there?
Exactly.
Okay. Just one more point on this. As you look at the different options for that part of the business, how long do you think that's going to take until you find the right solution?
As I said, it's several programs. Some of them will be fixed in the couple of months or quarters to come. One of those programs is a longer one. It's over almost a decade, implicating investment in development, industrialization, production, and then deliveries of satellites. And this will take by far more time to be fixed. We will have a better understanding of the level of charges and the impairment that we need to take on this particular program by the end of this year.
All right, Guillaume, I do want to talk about the commercial side of this business. You have issues over there, though I think issues that any of your competitors would love, and that's a lot of demand, but you're still dealing with a lot of supply chain issues that is limiting what you can actually deliver. When do you think those supply chain issues will be sorted out?
Actually, we are in a phase of steep ramp-up. As you rightly said, we have a lot of demand. Actually, we have a backlog of roughly 8,500 planes, and there is a lot of demand for short-term deliveries. So we're trying to find the right speed of ramp-up that is a compromise between a very strong demand and contractual obligations that we have taken and the ability of the supply chain to deliver on that ramp-up. And unfortunately, we have to adapt to the weaker link of the chain, to the slower ones, and it's not always the same. In 2022, we had plenty of difficulties with small and mid-sized suppliers, plenty of different reasons. That's behind us now. We had a successful 2023, and this year, unfortunately, we're hit by suppliers that are delivering systems that arrive late in the final assembly line. So we have limited ability to react to their own difficulties. So we are now focused on fixing those issues before we can continue to ramp up efficiently, hopefully for 25 and 26. So that's a bit of a case-by-case situation to be managed.
With regards to those suppliers that are either coming in late or just not meeting the obligations in some way or another, are you getting cost or price concessions as a part of that?
We have contractual arrangements with them. When they don't deliver on time, they're obviously under the risk of liquidated damages. Now, we are also open to finding other ways of dealing with the situation when that makes sense for us. But indeed, they are penalized when they are not able to deliver on time and when they lead to us being not able to deliver to our airline customers that really need the planes. So that's the situation we're in. We prefer to get parts on time than being compensated, obviously. But when it is the case, that's what it is.
Guillaume, what is your level of confidence that you can monitor all the supply chain in real time and that there won't be more surprises like the LEAP engine that come down?
It's a big challenge. We can't be monitoring 100% of the supply chain with the same degree of depth and of energy, of focus of teams. So we have organized during COVID what we call watchtowers, where we are reviewing, where we're scanning, where we're assessing all of our suppliers based on risk. We determine the ones that are the most likely to cause issues and problems, the weaker ones, and then we're focusing our efforts on those ones. Now, when it's about engine makers, for instance, that are late at the moment, they have themselves a very deep supply chain, they are very structured, and they are in a complex business, so we cannot do the business of engine makers as we are an aircraft OEM, but we're trying to alleviate the consequences, to mitigate the consequences of their own difficulties, but we can't be monitoring the whole supply chain ourselves.
Let's go to the defense side of the business for a moment and talk about supply and demand there, because it feels like the path of least resistance is going to be more European spending on defense, no matter who wins the White House in the United States in November. Can you take more orders for your defense areas right now?
Yes, we can. Indeed, Europe is in a different situation since February 2022 with the attack of Russia on Ukraine. That's a very different environment when it comes to security, when it comes to defense. And indeed, the European countries, most of the European countries have decided to spend more money for security and defense, and we can take more orders. Actually, we have seen an increase of the order intake in 2023 compared to previous years, and we have a good start in the year 2024. So that's a different situation than compared to commercial. We have available slots and capacity, and we can take more orders indeed.
Do you think, Guillaume, you're going to see more business on the defense side, that is, from non-European nations?
We have a good flow of business from export countries. That's very important for Airbus. We are mainly living from export orders and contracts. It's the case as well in defense. Now we have up and downs from one year to the other one. And I would see the main area of growth for defense business coming from European countries more than from the rest of the world. But there will be also some good export contracts here and there. So that's basically the situation. Rather stable on export and significant growth for our home countries.
How much discussion have you had with world leaders, or at least their representatives of these world leaders, who of course are contending with the issue of how to deal with some of these military contracts and at the same time keep some of that sensitive information that goes into that sensitive technology away from their would-be adversaries or their perceived adversaries? What are those discussions like?
Yeah, we have a constant dialogue with our governmental customers, the European countries, but as well countries outside of Europe, on how to do business, what kind of information can be exchanged, the confidentiality of activities, and whole situation around the world. That's something that is taking more time, more effort, and that has gained in terms of importance.
Guillaume, before we let you go, when we keep hearing from airlines in their earnings, it's all about capacity. They got to take out capacity. They have to take out capacity. At some point, do they go to you and say, hey, just kidding, we don't need those planes because I have to take out capacity?
Our airline customers are facing strong demand themselves. So indeed, they want planes as much as we can deliver, but we are limited by our supply chain issues and constraints. It's not specific to Airbus, as you know, so we are working hand in hand to trying to find the best way to satisfy their needs. And then there's no general statement. It's a case-by-case discussion depending on the priorities, the ability to deliver, and the particular situation that comes with this airline or that airline in the US, in Europe, in Asia. Each and every situation is different.
Hey, Guillaume, we only have about 30 seconds, but I do want to just get your thoughts on the interest rate environment. We've got a big Fed meeting here in the United States, and there's been a lot of speculation about whether other global central banks will start to cut rates in a meaningful way this year. Does that affect you, or at least affect your outlook?
It has an impact. It's a moderate impact for us, but we've been in a rather complex environment in terms of inflation, in terms of interest rates, and that makes the life of companies more difficult. We need to be able to anticipate. We need certainty and visibility, but having the rates going down is going to be a positive news for us, and obviously this is something we are monitoring.
All right, Guillaume, really appreciate you taking time for us. Guillaume Faré there, he's the Airbus CEO, right on the heels of the plane makers' big earnings. And actually, the earnings were actually pretty good. I mean, obviously, a lot of concern here about whatever's going on with that space business here. And even on the commercial side, they've got issues. But again, this is more of a problem of having too much demand and not enough of the supply to actually cater to it.
Is there like a tech thing that I can make for this? Like too much demand and not enough supply? I mean, that's something we're going to have to look at through with some of these tech guys when they come out. Like, they can't book the revenue if they can't wind up selling the product because there's just not enough of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of interesting, too. He talked about some of the suppliers. Obviously, he wouldn't name them, but he kind of made it clear that this is a lot on their end, and he kind of alluded to the fact that they do get some concessions here. So maybe financially it all sorts out for them.
But it is really tricky because you can't see everything at once.
Yeah.
Like, you can't have eyes on everything. So how do you have that kind of security in your supply chain?
Yeah, I don't know, but you have to, right? I mean, that's the challenge of being a plane maker CEO, as the other big plane maker CEO learned the hard way over at Boeing.
Very much the hard way. That's a good point.
Absolutely. All right, when we come back here, we're going to take a look at some of the big movers on the back of analyst recommendations, and that includes a firm cashing in after getting a new bull on the street. That's coming up next. This is The Close on Bloomberg.
The top names in business are on Bloomberg.
The challenge for us now is not very much on the product, it's on the ramp-up of the production system.
We turned the industry down to almost zero during the pandemic. And what we're trying to do now is turn it all the way back on. And that's hard. We lost not only people during the pandemic, we lost a tremendous amount of experience.
A lot of skilled people have left the industry. We have to hire new people. The supply chain has to hire new resources and train the people, educate them.
And because those roles are filled now not by a 58-year-old, but perhaps by a 28-year-old, there's a lot we have to do in terms of not only adding capacity, but capability to meet the ramp that we all are embarked upon.
We have thousands of suppliers, and when you have just a couple of them, few of them that are late on the ramp-up, well, that's slowing down everybody, and that's what we've been facing earlier this year.
Nobody covers business like Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Morning from our world headquarters in New York. I'm Manus Krennic.
And I'm Danny Berger. Let's set your agenda.
Bloomberg Brief delivers the market news, data, and analysis you need live every weekday at 5 a.m. Eastern. Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
All right, time now for our top calls. These are the big movers on the back of analyst recommendations, and we start off today with a firm. Bank of America lifting its rating to buy from neutral. The analyst saying the buy now, pay later lender can reach profitability sooner than expected, and a potential drop in interest rates should help to lower the company's funding and transaction costs. Those shares rallying by about 2% here on the day. Next up, let's take a look at Sprouts Farmers Market. A positive earnings report yesterday, an analyst upgrade today. BMO Capital raising the market perform, saying same-store sales last quarter were too strong to ignore, coming solidly ahead of buy-side expectations despite competitive risks from more mainstream grocers. That stock having its best day in about 2 years, a 13% rally. That pushes it, 15% rally, that pushes it to a record high. And finally, let's take a look at Frontier Group, getting its first sell rating since going public back in 2021. A cut to underweight over at JP Morgan. The analyst, Jamie Baker, growing increasingly uncomfortable with the budget airline's reliance on sale leasebacks. He says it's leading to capacity temptations in excess of what demand can potentially handle. Nevertheless, the shares rallying 4% on the day, and those, Alex, are some of our top calls.
All right, coming up, Federal Reserve rate decision out tomorrow. Our conversation with Phoebe White, head of U.S. inflation strategy at JP Morgan. This is Bloomberg.
We want to make sure that we're exposed to categories that continue to be relevant to consumers, that we're positioned in categories where we have a competitive right to win.
By strategically adding and shedding assets, General Mills has turned over about 20% of its net sales base in the last 6 years. It's dramatically expanded its pet food platform, starting with the purchase of Blue Buffalo Pet Products in 2018. That expansion dovetailed with a boom in demand.
Pet in the U.S., pet feeding and treating, is a $50 billion category. It's almost 5 times the size of a category like cereal.
Is this the future of the company? I mean, we so much associate General Mills with breakfast and cereals, human breakfast and human cereals. Are we now going to be thinking about General Mills much more as a pet food company?
I think you'll be thinking about General Mills as a food company, where we treat all the members of the family like family.
The humanization of pets is actually the biggest driver of pet food and pet treating growth. It has derivatives in not only feeding, which is the core thing that most households where most of the dollars go against the pet, but treating, and then you start to branch out to things like vitamins and minerals and supplements.
People really love their pets. They want to take care of their pets like they do their family, and it really is a global phenomenon. That's why we recently entered the China market with Blue Buffalo. That's why we bought Edgar & Cooper recently in Europe, because we see the same kinds of trends that have played out here in the U.S. playing out all over the world.
People ask me all the time, what is the key to being a really good investor? And I tell them it's to surround yourself with and work with the best investors you can find. On Bloomberg Wealth, I'm going to take you to meet the greatest investors in the world, the people that I would like to have managing my money.
What we try to do is combine some of our insights from the fundamental business with external and data set signals. And I think that's a lot of times where the opportunity is.
think he's going to say that they are more confident that inflation is starting to move back towards their goal after progress had stalled in the first half of this year. Of course, the fact that shelter inflation has shown more progress in the last few inflation prints is going to help in that. But I don't think that they're going to, I don't think they're going to be in a huge rush. We think they are going to signal a September cut.
Tiffany Wilding, the chief economist over at PIMCO, talking about our expectations for a big decision day for the Fed tomorrow. Romaine Bostic here alongside Alex Teal, counting you down to the close, and I guess counting down to that Fed meeting as well, as investor expectations have really shifted over the last couple of months.
But then we get the numbers today from JOLTS, right? And that quick trade's coming down, but the number overall moved higher, and consumer confidence was okay. Like, it was mixed, but it was okay. So if growth is resilient, though, how do we extrapolate inflation from that?
That's the conundrum here, right? Because, I mean, you can look at all these data points and you can make a case for cutting. You could also look at those exact same data points and make a case for just keeping rates where they are.
Yep, confirmation bias. So let's get someone's take who may have a stronger opinion than Romaine and I. That's Phoebe White, head of U.S. inflation strategy over at JP Morgan. Phoebe, it's like a Rorschach test for Romaine and I when we're like parsing through the data and trying to figure out if it's good or bad or what the Fed should do. What do you think we're going to hear from Powell and how that outlines September?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. So I think we will hear from Powell that the recent data is adding conviction that inflation is on the right path. And I think, the signaling will set up that first cut coming in September. That is our call. But I think it's going to be really interesting to hear how they are reading the data. I think you're right. A lot of the data recently has been mixed and is sending somewhat of a muddy signal here.
So could that mean that maybe we hear Powell give a more balanced view of what could happen versus setting up the stage for September? And if that happens, what happens to the market?
Well, I think the case is still there to start dialing back the level of restrictiveness in the policy rate. I think in terms of talking about the balance of risks, it's going to be interesting if they start to shift their focus away from inflation, right? I think the first half of the year, all that has mattered was the inflation data. I think what we're seeing now is that, and this is something Powell said in his testimony 2 weeks ago, inflation is not the only risk they face. So how are they reading the labor market data? The fact that the unemployment rate is now 7/10 above the cycle low. Is there something to be worried about there? So I think that's really what the focus will be on.
Give us a sense here, though, Phoebe, when we talk about the idea of how you sort of create the criteria for cutting. And we have a market that went from, of course, at the start of the year, anticipating 5, maybe even 6 cuts to basically no cuts. Now they're basically back to somewhere around 2 to 3 by the end of the year. There's a lot of talk here about the election cycle and how the Fed doesn't want to get in the middle of that. If they don't cut tomorrow and they don't cut in September, what other options do they have?
Well, I think they could still certainly go in November. I think that the election won't necessarily hold them back on that front. But I think, they're waiting longer to see, for a little bit more data. I think that's the case for waiting instead of going tomorrow, waiting until September. But the case is still there for them to, again, start dialing back that level of restrictiveness. I think we got a mixed signal early in the year. We came out of a few months of very weak inflation readings, and then clearly the upside surprises that we got in the first quarter on the inflation front. We're in a sort of weird macroeconomic backdrop right now where I think all of the data is just more volatile. And so you need to smooth through some of these ups and downs. I think when you do that with the inflation data of the last 9 months, it's still sending us a signal that inflation is probably somewhere, in the mid-2s. It's still above target. They're not all the way back there, but they're more comfortable that they've made progress on that front. And now it's time to maybe pay a little bit more attention to the other side of the dual mandate.
I am curious, Phoebe, there's a lot of talk right now about Fed rates, the Fed funds rate, a little bit less talk about the quantitative tightening, if you will. I have no idea if they're even still tightening or not because they don't talk about it much anymore. But you are seeing a pickup in volatility on the shorter end of some of the fixed income curves here. Is that a sign that investors are expecting more there?
So I think, they've been clear about talking about balance sheet policy as normalization, right? You can think of that balance sheet policy on a separate track from rate policy. They're not really talking about the balance sheet policy as tightening. It's true that, yes, there's been more focus on that. We've seen, some movement in SOFR relative to Fed funds. We don't think that's a sign of reserve scarcity at this point. We think that liquidity in the system is still ample. So we think that QT will continue, through the end of the year. And that can still go on even as the Fed starts to, do some rate cuts, probably get in two cuts before the end of the year.
What kind of volatility, you mentioned that earlier, might we expect? I'm just looking at the 210 curve. We're at negative 21 basis points. How we get steeper has been quite up for debate. Barclays had a note out talking about the volatility if President Trump gets elected, particularly in the bond market. What should we brace for?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good point, and we haven't had a lot of conviction on duration right here. I think it's hard to feel comfortable extending duration when the market is already priced for so much easing, even through the end of next year. We've had more conviction on the shape of the yield curve. We think that the yield curve can continue to steepen into the end of the year, and I think that can take two forms. And on one end, if we're right and we see kind of gradual, slowing in growth, cooling in labor markets, and potentially even more weakening than we're forecasting, we could see the front end of the curve leading the way lower, especially sort of the 3 to 5 year sector of the curve, and leading the curve steeper. But we also do see a risk that if growth data continue to be resilient and we get that tail risk, a red sweep in November, I think markets will start to be focused on the risks around, potentially structurally higher deficits. Yeah. Do we see the tax cuts get extended? There's a lot of focus on potential tariffs and what that could mean for inflation. So in that kind of environment, I think there is a risk we could see a bear steepening of the curve where long end yields lead the way higher.
With the bear steepening, though, could that be a foregone conclusion no matter who's in the White House because of those structurally higher deficits and just more spending?
Yeah, so I think it's all right way risk, and certainly term premium and this sort of structural imbalance in the Treasury market has been top of mind for investors for quite some time now. We saw the events, that unfolded last fall, and so that's not going away. There is a very large financing gap that opens up in the coming years in terms of, the current coupon auction schedule that Treasury has laid out and versus how much debt needs to be issued. So there is a lot of issuance that needs to come down the pike in the coming years, and if we're in an environment where rates are still high and investors are not extending out duration, that does set up a risk that we get a bear steeper curve.
All right, Phoebe, always great to talk to you. Phoebe White, head of U.S. Inflation Strategy at J.P. Morgan, joining us here on day one of the two-day Fed meeting. A big decision tomorrow, 2 p.m. Washington time. Of course, we will have full coverage right here on Bloomberg. The Fed Decides special kicking off at 1:30 p.m. And I was just taking a look at the trajectory of rates, Alex Steele. We talk about a 2-year yield that about a year ago was over 5%. But even at the last Fed meeting back on June 12th, or the last Fed decision, it was still camped out around 4.8. And right now, we're all the way down to about under 4.4. And with the expectation that that's probably going to go down somewhere closer into the threes.
Yeah, it's already doing the Fed's job for it, in essence, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Companies who need the lower rates, well, you're kind of starting to get them already.
And I wonder, does the Fed, should Jay Powell just come out and thank the market? Because I feel like this is at least the second time where the market's done the work for him.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I mean, isn't that the whole point? When you have forward guidance, this is what happens. So either if you don't like it, then stop talking. I mean, is that where we're at here?
I don't know. It'll be interesting to have. I think it's going to be an interesting press conference. Who knows what the statement's going to say, but no matter what it says, he's going to get peppered with a lot of questions about when they're going to get going. All right, let's continue the conversation here as we count you down to the close. Just about 21 minutes to go. Shares of Novavax having one of its worst days in about 2 years. A downgrade, a price target cut over at J.P. Morgan, and a more than 20% drop in the stock. We break down what's fueling pessimism in our stock of the hour. It's coming up next, right here on The Close on Bloomberg.
names in global leadership are on Bloomberg.
I envisage not only some kind of a bridge towards membership or language linked to the irreversibility of Ukraine's membership in NATO, but also some kind of a broader package of military material, of financial aid. The more we support Ukraine right now, the sooner the war will end.
Nobody covers the top global leaders like Bloomberg Television and Radio.
Bloomberg Power Players is back this September. As the top names in tennis take the court over in Queens, we are convening the best of the sports world right here in New York. We'll host some of the most influential voices in the business and identify what happens next for players and fans in this multi-billion-dollar global industry. Bloomberg Power Players, September 5th. Register now at bloomberglive.com/powerplayers.
It's Jobs Day, and Bloomberg has the report under surveillance.
Do you think the jury's still out on the strength of the labor market?
Well, part of the problem is that July is usually a very bad month for jobless claims accuracy.
This Friday, Jonathan, Lisa, Anne-Marie, and Mike will bring you crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed.
We see the jobless numbers climb just bit by bit by bit. Is this a welcome cooling or an unwelcome deterioration?
The July Jobs Report, Friday on Bloomberg.
Time now for our stock of the hour. Novavax down more than 20%, worst day since at least February. This after J.P. Morgan downgraded the stock and gave it a street low price target. Bloomberg's Jess Menton joining us right now to talk a little bit more about what's ailing this company, or at least what's ailing the stock. And you just pointed this out during the commercial break. I kind of forgot.
Right.
They had a 300% rally in the span of really about 4 to 5 weeks back in May and June here. And that seems to be tied to the sell-off that we're having today. What's going on?
So Sanofi, the deal that they had back in May, so it was basically to commercialize the combination of the COVID-19 and flu vaccine together, but based on Eric Joseph over at JP Morgan, so they cut their target to $8, so that's a Wall Street low for that particular stock. If you look at where it's trading at right now, actually around $12 roughly, but because of that big run it had from the start of the year to where it peaked out in the beginning of June, that was a 300% rise, and then since then it's down about 40%. Point. So basically what he is arguing is the revenue that they feel like they would have gotten from that particular vaccine, they don't think it's going to be as strong as what investors were anticipating, but then also the overvaluation of that stock. Because if you compare that to the NASDAQ Biotechnology Index between almost the first half of the year, it was up about 4%, so largely outpacing its peers in that span.
Because Novavax had the COVID-19 shot, right?
That's
and then
right.
Sanofi has the flu shot. So then they would together combine, and the distribution would be helped by Sanofi.
Like Voltron.
Like, sure.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, just ignore me.
Isn't that DC Comics? I'm more of a Marvel.
Right.
Anyway, but this actually goes to what the analyst was also talking about in terms of like what that catalyst is and how that what the pipeline then will be for Novavax.
That's right. And so that's why they're thinking from the revenue side of things, it's just not going to be as strong of a driver for growth, even though once this deal happened, it was helpful to help kind of shore up its balance sheet and things like that when it comes to the company. But because of that and the outlook moving forward, that's why you see that as a target low on Wall Street for the stock.
And you should point out that $8 target. I was looking at that. I mean, that's half the average price target. There aren't a whole lot of analysts covering this company, but still, that's a pretty bold call to say.
It is.
To go down to 8. No one's even close to him on that point. But it gets to the idea too. I mean, kind of the Voltron of these shots, if you can indulge my analysis here. But part of the concern, I remember even when it was announced, was that what's the appetite for that, right? I mean, there are some people that are still getting COVID shots. Most people aren't. There are some people that are never going to get a flu shot. So by combining them, are you really gaining new customers, or are you just kind of, it's just basically the customers you already had? You know what I mean?
I think that's the kind of conundrum that they're in right now, and that's why you initially saw that big pop in that stock, and now the question kind of moving forward, what does that mean for consumers that are either still getting separate shots or whether or not they're going to get one that is combined?
So is Voltron, is he a transformer?
Oh my God. Alex Steele. Oh,
I love the debate.
I have so much to teach you. No, it's not Transformers. Transformers is a cheap knockoff of Voltron, by the way.
Sorry.
Apologies.
Okay, but I mean, it's not. I'm a Marvel person, so this is my jam. All right, I'm glad we kind of sorted that out. Jess, thanks a lot. We release you from this now. All right, coming up, we're going to continue to count you down to the closing bells. Dana Dioria, Investnet co-CIO, will be joining us. We'll get a check in here on where markets stand. We're trading a little heavy, yes, headed into Microsoft's earnings in just about 15 minutes time. Taking a look at an S&P that is down by about 0.5%, the Dow up 0.5%, and the NASDAQ down by 1.28%. All of those tech guys are trading a little heavy as we head into Microsoft numbers. This is the close on Bloomberg.
The names that move markets are on Bloomberg.
We've seen story after story about companies delisting from the London Stock Exchange, listing in New York, listing in Europe. I want to turn that around. I want Britain to be the place of choice to make an IPO, to grow your business. That's why I welcome the reforms that the FCA put in place last week. It's also why I'm determined to change our pension system so we can keep more businesses here in Britain.
Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
You are also an owner, I should have pointed out, of 3 major sports teams.
That's right.
Right? And you're the first woman, as I understand it, first woman to own 3 major, have a stake in 3 major sports teams. Is that right?
Yes, and we'll say African American.
You were approached by the owner then of the, I guess, the Washington Wizards and the Washington Caps about maybe buying the Washington Mystics, which is the women's basketball team. And what did you say?
Well, first of all, it was Abe Pollin. He did come to me and Susan O'Malley, and they said, Abe Pollin says, look, I want you to be the face of the Washington Mystics. And I said, what do you mean be the face of? He says, I want you to buy this team. His health was failing. And I have to tell you, and a lot of women can understand this, we never get these opportunities. So that was the first thing that struck me, and I was flattered.
So 1 minute away now to the market on close imbalance.
Hey, what are the financials on this? And he handed them to me. He says, well, they're not making money. But I was still intrigued about team ownership.
It's the world's second largest economy with a growing influence in global affairs. But geopolitical uncertainties, deflationary pressures, and questions about foreign investment linger. Bloomberg, the China Show, brings you the unmatched expertise you need to keep track of breaking news, in-depth market analysis, and the most influential newsmakers in and around China. Bloomberg, the China Show. Weekdays at 9 a.m. Hong Kong time, right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
DOJ or other authorities
could face bigger challenges next.
It was going to keep winning World Cup. This is a 3
as the economic picture
covering the intersection.
So we're looking now to the market on close imbalance. The S&P 500 seeing 2.4 billion to the buy side. So NASDAQ 100 seeing 320 million. That's to the buy side as well. So also seeing the Dow 30, that's seeing 790 million to the buy side.
AI
And the Mag 7
exuberance is
stock
leading to
seeing
AI
55 million to
impatience now, and
sell.
I can certainly understand why, but you're right. For Microsoft, this is a $2 trillion company. Certainly the amount of CapEx being thrown into this is non-trivial. Right now, Microsoft has a lead in AI. This is the first tech lead Microsoft has had in a major tech shift in quite some time. Recall Azure was a fast follower alongside AWS. So Microsoft has no intentions of slowing down here as far as we can tell.
Michael Turin over at Wells Fargo kicking us off to the close just about 50 minutes ago. A push ahead to those Microsoft earnings expected to come within the next 10 to 20 minutes.
Yeah, but either way, you have a heavy trading when it comes to tech. So you have the Russell outperforming a little bit, but that's basically because the Sprouts Farmer is doing so well, and that's a large part of the Russell 2000. But CrowdStrike, one of the worst performing stocks on the S&P, NASDAQ 100 down a full 1 percentage point off the lows. But this is not a nice tape to be going into big tech earnings for AMD and Microsoft.
Yeah, a lot of questions right now here about the sustainability of the rally, and of course, a lot of that tied to fundamentals. Dana D'Auria joining us right now, co-president of InvestNet Solutions and co-CIO over there at InvestNet as well. Dana, great to have you here. A big focus right now on big tech. I guess, you know, on one hand, we talk about this sell-off that we've seen in the NASDAQ 100. At one point today, we were almost near that 10% threshold for a correction. And I guess maybe Microsoft saves us tonight, or does it just dig that hole deeper?
Well, I think it's asymmetric because everybody wants to see good news, and I think good news would be absorbed by the market as a positive for sure, and probably prevent that correction for the time being. But negative, you know, a suggestion that AI is not moving as fast, which is what everybody's listening for now, right? AI is just not moving as fast as maybe we hoped. We overshot. We priced too much in too fast. You know, a suggestion along those lines, I think, has asymmetric negative for tech stocks and, you know, for the average investor, right? Because let's face it, these big growth stocks are the market at this stage of the game. And a lot of people are, you know, either at market, they're indexing, or they got low tracking error to the market. So it's an interesting place to be.
Even if we don't get sort of that big reveal on AI, and by reveal, I'm talking about actual revenue and profit, a growth that's directly attributable to AI, we're still talking about companies in Microsoft, I guess the next couple of days with Meta, Amazon, Apple. We're not only just talking about four of the biggest stocks out there, but four of the biggest cash generators in the history of public markets here. So even if we don't get that AI story, would there not be enough there on the other lines of businesses to keep investors happy at these current valuations?
Yeah, I think that's it. You said it right there, right? These are cash cows. This is not the dot-com bubble. When you look at the, you know, what the earnings expectations are of these companies with next to their valuations, yes, they are highly priced. But at the same time, they continue to produce earnings that, you know, justify an expectation that they can fund and self-fund their ventures into AI, and they can do it for some time. So I agree with the premise of the question completely. I think we had just gotten the fundamentals had just gotten so dispersed, right? You had at a certain point 97th percentile on, you know, your standard 60-40 valuation, given, you know, the S&P 500 being that equity position, and so much of the S&P 500 being in these stocks. And, you know, it's actually good for the market to see the broadening out a little bit, to see small caps finally stepping forward. And of course, that's happened in a huge way, you know, 10%. You know, comeback in the span of a month. But for the average investor, of course, who's probably not equal weighted and maybe tilts a little bit toward that, but probably closer to market cap weighted, this looks a lot more like a pullback. And really, it's probably just a little bit of, you know, fundamentals kind of coming into the picture a little bit more than they have been.
So let me get your take on what's happening with small caps then. So the Russell is up by about 0.5%, right? On the one hand, Lori Calvasine of RBC says, I don't know if I totally buy this one yet, because you don't get to see a sustained outperformance in small caps unless you get a recession. But then you get some earnings, and the earnings are pretty good. Just look at Sprouts Farmers.
Yeah, the thing I would say is that we do have more unprofitable companies in the small cap index than the average. The average is about 26. I think it's, you know, something like 40%-ish now that, you know, unprofitable small caps. So I can
So
give you
in
a thesis
5
on
minutes
both
time
sides.
now, I
I
do
would say,
get
look,
the
we're dealing with a situation where you've got more unprofitability.
excuse me,
You
5
also
minutes
have
time,
the
do get the
situation with
cash
small
equity
caps
close
now
for the
where,
US, and then
and this
10
is kind
minutes
of a big,
time, earnings season
secular
continues.
trend that
At
a
4:05
lot of companies
p.m.
just
Eastern
aren't
time today, we
coming
get
to
Starbucks
IPO. They're
printing
not becoming
Q2
publicly
2024
traded
earnings,
for
estimated
longer.
EPS of
And so the
93 cents, and
innovation
estimated
that would
revenue of
drive outperformance in
$9.24
small
billion.
caps, if you look across the
And more
history,
noteworthy though is
small
at 10
value in
past 4, so
particular
that's
outperforms
4:10
over
p.m.
time.
Eastern time.
The thesis
Another
against
Mag
that
7
is
stock
if a
printing
lot of
earnings.
the
That's
innovation is taking
Microsoft.
place and these
They're
companies
printing
are
their
still
Q2
private,
2024
then those
earnings.
bumps
They're
that we
being
see in the
slated as kind of
historical
kicking
data
off the
that
big tech
enable that index to
Mag 7
outperform,
earnings
because it really
season.
comes from
So their
small
estimated
cap companies
EPS
that
is
do well and move
$2.90.
into mid
Estimated
and
revenue
large
of
cap space. Maybe that's being earned
$64.16
by
billion.
private investors and not public
After this as
investors.
well,
So
it's
there
at
is some
4:15 p.m.
questioning
Eastern
of,
time.
the
In the
thesis in general, I
semiconductor
think.
space, we've got
But still,
AMD
at the
printing their
valuations we
Q2
were at,
2024
the
earnings.
values matter
Their
eventually.
estimated EPS
Yes, they do.
67 cents, with a
Overvaluation
revenue
also
estimate of
matters too, hence
$5.71
what we've
billion.
seen
So
in the tech
again,
space.
keeping our eyes out
Where is
for
the
earnings after the
asymmetric
close
risk
today.
then, or the pain trade over the next couple days with the Fed and with big tech earnings?
I think it's volatility. You're just expect a volatile week. Obviously we'll see what Powell says tomorrow. There's an expectation in the market at this point that we're going to get a rate cut in September. You're even hearing chatter about a 50 basis point in September now. As usual, the market is probably overshooting a little bit on the good news. So I would say that with some of that, obviously small caps being more interest rate sensitive, some of that is powering what we're seeing going on, where small caps are kind of coming back in line a little bit from a valuation perspective. So, if we don't get from Powell something as dovish as the market's expecting, maybe that hurts small caps a little bit in the short run.
All right, Dana, always great to catch up with you. Dana Dioria, co-president of InvestNet Solutions. As we count you down to those closing bells, just about 3 minutes to go here. Taking a look at the Magnificent Seven, Alex, with big tech in focus here. 5 of those Magnificent Seven stocks in the red. That includes Microsoft, only down fractionally, but of course they've got a lot to show later tonight.
I'm really excited for these earnings because you have NVIDIA and Microsoft, right, two of the top most owned stocks.
Yeah.
We've already had that sell-off. So what happens if they increase CapEx? Like what happens if they wind up not being able to deliver the kind of generative AI revenue growth?
And it's a kind of a balance too, because if they pull back on CapEx, you think investors, investors I feel like would react negatively to that. You have to be in this game. And I think it's more about articulating that narrative, right? We talk so much about some of these CEOs that really just know how to spin a narrative. Obviously, Elon Musk, a master at that, even if half of what he says isn't true. But you have other, people like Jensen Huang also does a great job at this. And you wonder whether we're going to get that out of the executives at Microsoft, for that matter, Apple, Amazon, and Meta as well over the next few days.
And they still make boatloads of money. Like to your point, if you make boatloads of money, can you spend boatloads of money? Like they don't have the same kind of top line or margin pressure that like a Procter & Gamble does when you're sort of dealing with the consumer.
How investors are. They say, why don't you push that boatload of money over to us?
Yeah, that's
all right. We are moving closer to those closing bells. Full market coverage coming up right now. A breakdown of the day's events. This is Bloomberg.
The Closing Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close, starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic and Alex Steele here to help take you through the closing bell, a global simulcast. It starts right now. Scarlett Fu joining us in the TV studio. Carol Masser and Tim Stenovic in the radio booth as we welcome our audiences across all of our platforms. That includes our partnership with YouTube. Carol Masser, an interesting day here in the market. Green on the screen if you're in that small cap, mid cap, and cyclical space. But if you're a big tech stock, you're probably in the red.
Right. And this makes us wonder, okay, so when Microsoft reports earnings after the closing bell, is it a different story than what we got from Alphabet last week? Is the AI spend going to show in some of those numbers from Microsoft? When you've got a company that, as our BI team keeps reminding us, is trading at what, 35, 40 times earnings, you've got to show some kind of upside catalyst. Do we get that from Microsoft? Does it change the tone in the tech trade? We will see.
$13.27 billion. That's what analysts are projecting for CapEx spend. We saw what happened last week when Alphabet's Google missed on that number, Scarlett. So we'll see what Microsoft says in just a couple of minutes.
Yeah, and the big question is whether Satya Nadella, the CEO, will be more specific in terms of how much AI services contributes to the Azure business. He had said 7 points last time in the third quarter. Does he build on that? Does he give more concrete numbers?
And let's not forget, guys, we have a lot of other earnings coming out. We got AMD, we also have Pinterest, we also have Starbucks, and there's a lot more. And I'm really interested in Starbucks in terms of their pricing ability and the top line, right?
Is that app working again?
Yeah.
What's that?
Is the app working
Buy
again?
one, get one.
Oh, I heard. That was very upsetting earlier
Right, and of course that was tied to Microsoft as well. They're going to have to answer a lot of questions here.
So expecting Starbucks earnings in 5 minutes time now. Estimated EPS 93 cents. Estimated revenue $9.24 billion. And in 10 minutes time we're expecting Microsoft Q2 2024 earnings. Estimated EPS $2.90. Estimated revenue $64.16 billion.
And at one point was down almost 10% from its most recent record high. Let's take a look at the Russell 2000. That's holding in the green here on the day, higher fractionally by 0.3%.
All right, real quick check on the S&P 500, guys. You have 340 names actually trending higher in today's session, 161, Scarlett, to the downside.
All right, let's take a look at the sector performances as well. 7 sectors in the green, energy and financials leading the way, each gaining at least 1%. REITs following up with a 0.8% advance, but look at the downside. It's tech. Tech is down 2.2% as a group, and consumer staples and consumer discretionary.
So we're seeing Microsoft earnings coming in. Revenues are beat 64.7 billion on an estimate of 64.52 billion. EPS at $2.95, a beat on an estimate of $2.90. Intelligent Cloud revenues 28.52 billion, a miss on estimates of $28.72 billion. The shares down in post-market trade now. NASDAQ 100 futures as well down as well.
Earnings per share $2.95, and fourth quarter Intelligent Cloud revenue, always important to this company, 28.52.
Cloud revenue is a miss as well, 36.8 billion, an estimate of 36.84 billion.
Microsoft right now down 4% in the aftermarket.
Capital expenditures coming in slightly above estimates, about 13.87 billion to be precise. The street was looking for 13.27, so not really exceeding those expectations by a whole lot, guys, but it'll be interesting to see the market reaction specifically to that expenditure number as you see the shares now continuing to weaken in after-hours trading.
Yeah, down 7% as we speak. Satya Nadella in a statement saying our strong performance this fiscal year speaks both to our innovation and to the trust consumers continue to place in Microsoft. As a platform company, we are focused on meeting the mission-critical needs of our customers across our at-scale platforms today, while also ensuring we lead the AI era.
Yeah, also we should note that Azure and other cloud services revenue growth of 29%, of 30% in constant currency. We knew that it was going to be around 30%, but there are a lot of analysts that were saying that it has to at least beat those numbers if it wanted to get a bump in the stock. And you're seeing right now the stock down about 7% after hours trading.
Yeah, so just to recap, I mean, you can say that the revenue and earnings beat or came in line with estimates, but CapEx moved a little bit higher already from a very high base. And as Scarlett just pointed out, the other revenue services for cloud, which includes that AI portion, came in a little bit lighter. So this is exactly what we were talking about, guys, going into the report. They keep spending more, but what they're able to deliver in terms of that profit for AI is coming in a little bit lighter than estimated.
Yeah, and this is where they're going to have to give more commentary and color, if you will, on the call to get an idea of, in terms of the investing or what the spending that is going on and how it is paying off or taking longer to pay off. I mean, this is where you need some more clarity. And this is when you've got a stock that has moved up significantly and you've got a high, PE on it.
Noting shares of Amazon, Datadog, and Snowflake as well seem to be following Amazon down in post-market trade here.
I think we're going to have to wait to see if on the call we get it, because right now investors aren't buying it. They're not liking it, and the stock is down 7%.
Okay, revenue once again coming in above estimates at $64.73 billion. Intelligent Cloud revenue coming in below estimates at $28.52 billion. The estimates for $28.72 billion. Productivity and business process revenue did come in above estimates, and more personal computing revenue.
So seeing NASDAQ futures down around 2.5% now, S&P down as well around 1.3%.
Estimates were for $13.27 billion, so that came in a little higher than analysts wanted to see.
Microsoft shares themselves down around 7% post-market trade here.
Look at the cost of revenue here. On the product side, that cost of revenue is down significantly, almost by about half. But when you look on services and other, and I put that other in quotation marks because we know what it's talking about, jumping almost about 40-something%, if my math is correct, up to about $18 billion.
You also wonder how much they're going to talk about outages in today's earnings call because of what's been happening today, but also in previous weeks with CrowdStrike's update that didn't go too well and took down every computer that seemed to have a certain version of Microsoft Office.
Well, no doubt they're definitely going to get questions on that. And just to keep in mind that we still don't know what their outlook is going to be. They're not going to give us the outlook until we get on the call. So yes, we're seeing Microsoft and other stocks like Amazon getting under pressure, but let's wait for that outlook also.
Have they actually resolved all of these issues? I mean, we talk about, I know the CrowdStrike issue is still kind of being sorted out, but then you had the outage earlier today. I know where there were some headlines saying that they had sort of resolved that, but it gets to the question here as to just how deep this runs.
It also just shows how fragile the ecosystem is. I mean, we saw basically, entire airline crippled for days as a result of this outage. And we
don't forget all the folks at Starbucks who, for some reason, could not get their coffee.
Buy one, get one free today.
Apparently, you can't buy coffee unless you have an app.
It was also like a nation, it included parts of Canada,
Which I don't understand how that works. I went into the Starbucks down the way here.
Yeah, CrowdStrike's down 40% from its highs.
Do you not want to hear my Starbucks story, Tim?
Oh, I didn't hear you say that.
Okay, Starbucks earnings are out, by the way.
Yeah, let's take a look at
I do
Starbucks.
want to hear your Starbucks story.
Comp sales down 3%. Analysts were looking for a drop of 2.7%. So not a surprise there because we know the company has been struggling a bit here, both in the U.S.
Starbucks earnings leading the wire now as well. So we're seeing their adjusted EPS a beat at 93 cents on estimates of 92 cents. Net revenues a miss at $9.11 billion on estimates of $9.2 billion. China comp sales are down 14%. They're expected to be down 10.6%, so that's lower than expected. International comp sales down 7%, also deeper than the 5.11% that was expected. North America comp sales down deeper as well, 2% on estimates of 1.62%.
1.95 to 2.05 billion. That's higher than
the comp sales down 3% as well. They're expected to be down 2.71%.
to 7.7 billion. Estimates were for.
They're still seeing shares of Starbucks rise after their earnings report too.
2.05 to 2.25 billion. That estimate for $2.08 billion. Shares not really moving in the after hours.
Mondelez out, the big food company here. It looks like a beat all around. The bottom line numbers, EPS adjusted for the second quarter, 86 cents a share. The street was looking for 79 cents. Revenue in the quarter, 8.34 billion. That's a slight miss, excuse me. The street was looking for about 8.5 billion, but we should point out that operating margins did improve, 17.9% a beat. Gross margins also up 40.5%. That's also a beat. The shares higher by about 1%.
All right, also taking a look at Pinterest here. Adjusted earnings coming in about 29 cents a share, so that was actually better than estimated. Also, the average revenue per user estimate was better than expected. However, the outlook for the third quarter, the range that Pinterest sees now is 885 million to 900 million. The estimate was for 907 million, so a little bit of a disappointment there as well.
Look at those shares.
They might get that impression growth in terms of ad pricing, but ad pricing environment is still quite challenging for the company.
All right, folks, one more we want to get to. Live Nation is crossing as we speak, and let's get to the earnings. Let me pull them up on my Bloomberg. Live Nation crossing, and you're looking at second quarter adjusted operating income, $716.2 million. That's a beat. The estimate is $660.7. Second quarter revenue, smack in line with what the street was expecting, $6.02 billion. And the company also saying the number of fee-bearing tickets, 78.47 million. That's a miss. Estimate is 81.69 million. We're seeing the stock right now unchanged in the aftermarket.
Yeah, kind of interesting too. I mean, I was looking at the breakdown by actual events here, and they talk about concerts revenue being up. And remember, there was about 8% in the quarter, and there was all this talk about how we were going to see a drop because, of course, the big bump that you got last year because you had two mega concerts with Beyonce and Taylor Swift, and I guess now you only have Taylor Swift on tour. Is she still on tour?
She is. She's ending it in like a couple months. So.
Forever?
No, just this one time. It can't be forever. My daughter would be so sad.
Is she still dating that football guy?
Yes.
Yeah. Do we have time for your Starbucks story, Romy?
No, I think we're out of time now.
Too bad.
But don't worry, I'm coming by the radio booth right after this to regale
Lock the door. Okay, Starbucks is up 3% in the aftermarket. Microsoft, though, down 7%. All right, guys, that's a wrap. Across platform, radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. The closing bell.
So Microsoft is sliding as much as 8% as their Q4 cloud revenue misses estimates.
Alex is heading out, but Scarlett and Romaine are on TV, and we're going to stay right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
And we continue our coverage right here on Bloomberg Television. A focus right now on big tech, a focus on Microsoft.
Let's keep in mind, in around 5 minutes' time, we're still expecting earnings from AMD as well. Their estimated EPS 67 cents, estimated revenue of $5.71 billion.
In CapEx spending, despite the fact that they did beat on several key metrics in the most recent quarter. Doug Clinton joining us right now. He's a managing partner over at Deepwater Asset Management to talk about his reaction here. What jumped out at you in this earnings report, Doug?
Well, it wasn't so much the CapEx. It was really more about the cloud services number. You know, I think that it needed to just be a little bit higher. And right now we are in an environment where you cannot miss at all. You cannot get anything wrong as a mega cap tech company. Google proved that last week, where I thought their numbers were generally fine. I thought Microsoft's numbers were, again, generally fine, but that's just not enough right now in this market, where I think investors are looking for any reason to say the AI boom is over and we want to exit tech.
I am curious, though, about when we talk about valuations. I mean, Microsoft was not necessarily one of the barn burners in the tech space. I mean, I would think it was only up about 12 or 13% year to date prior to that. And I know even at a 32 times projected earnings, there are some people say that that valuation's inflated, but I'm looking at the balance sheet here. This is still a lot of cash on the balance sheet, a lot of cash generated in the most recent quarter. And of course, when you talk about the services revenue here, this is still a juggernaut here. What more do people want?
I think that they want to see more from AI sooner than is reasonable. And this has been a theme that we've been talking about at Deepwater pretty consistently. I think the reality is we've seen for the last 12 months, these mega cap tech companies have been investing heavily in building out infrastructure for a future that they see that's just not here yet. And I think that this quarter has demonstrated more than any other quarter so far in that build out that investors are getting a little bit impatient. And I think the reality is this: we're going to work through this earnings. Other big cap tech companies